Hey, howdy ho, neighborinos. It's the Stratosphere Lounge. I'm your host, Bill Whittle, and we are back for episode number 76 of the worst produced show on the internet. Yay! Hail Vectron. Hopefully everybody's getting the picture, getting the signal from the new office, our second show from the new office. We don't have the Stratosphere Lounge banner up yet, but we're expecting to. I have talked to a guy who's going to be printing it, and we're going to put that sucker on the wall back over that away. And as we mentioned last time, I'm holding the mic here, probably hold it all night. It makes it a little bit better to cut down on some of the AC noise that we got here. I think what we're going to be doing, though, as I might have mentioned, is that once we get that background set up over there, we're going to do the show with two cameras. And our trusted operations manager, Desiree Gabrielle, will do the switching. We can go to wide shots and mid shots and two shots if we have a guest. And then we can also just zoom in and have some fun. So that'll be cool. And I think probably go to lavalier mics, although I do love this mic. I might have to find a way to see what we can do about taking that fan blower down. The AC controls in here are Bulgarian pre-World War I models, and they're not terribly sophisticated, so I have to talk to them about that too. They turn the AC off pretty early here at the building, sometimes 6 o'clock at night, which is about now. It starts to warm up a little bit, and on the weekends, it's not on. And it's 100 degrees outside. It's about 100 degrees inside, so we're working on that too. Anyway, it's great to be here, and it is part 3 of our space series. We were going to do a two-parter, and we started talking about space combat, and that got to be just so interesting. I knew that was going to take us all the way there. So we'll get into that in just a second, but before we do, a couple of quick little tidbits, I suppose is the word I'm looking for. We've got something that I just really, really love. I was down at Comic-Con for the weekend. I never been before, but it was pretty cool. It's not the kind of place you want to go as a civilian. I'll be there next year with big bat problems because we are going to be going and shooting big bat problems this winter. And if I have to do it with $30, that's what I want to do. If I have to Kickstarter the thing for $100,000, that's what we'll do, and hopefully we'll be able to get a lot more money than that. But I'm going out this winter to shoot that movie because it's just really fun and really cool. So next time I go down there, I'm going to have a movie to hawk. It was an incredible experience. I have to tell you, I went down there for preview night on Wednesday. I spent about an hour and a half on the main convention floor, and I was pretty much okay. That's pretty much all I needed to see. But the whole trip was worth it. For no other reason. We all remember, I'm sure, Stella Stevens, our unexplainedly single PhD in astrophysics holding secretary. And, excuse me, still can't shake this cough. And so I was just so smitten by that. This is just the day before we went down. And I'm walking through the convention floor on Wednesday night, on preview night, and two things struck me. First of all, I did seem to find a supplier of the extremely rare, hard-to-find pants for your original series show. Now that jersey there, by the way, the gold jersey, it's from the Star Trek Afterburner I did a couple years ago. That is genuine velour, ladies and gentlemen, not the crap that they're trying to pass off on people down there. But the problem was those are just black jeans, and we just kind of, black jeans are black jeans, but I went to the convention floor and they had authentic original series jeans with kind of the hidden zipper and the kind of the flared pants right there where the boots come up. And I didn't notice this. I don't know if I ever noticed it on the show, but they actually have a little bit of like glitter woven into them. So I'm ready for action as far as Geekathon goes next time. So as long as you get your Star Trek velour uniform, you might as well have the sweet pants to go with it, right? So that's number one. But the thing I really found that I was really excited about is you can see there's a big orange accent wall, but off to the right there, when you open the door to the new office, the first thing you see is a big accent wall, and it's orange. It's orange! And I needed something for that wall, and I didn't know what the hell I was going to get for it. So I just didn't have a clue. I know I'm going to put my Sid Mead stuff up here and backlight those with the LEDs and all that other stuff. So I'm walking through the convention floor, and I'm not a comic book guy or just never have been. Just don't have anything against it. It just never really interested me. And there's hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of artists there, each with their own little booths. And I turned this corner just as I was getting ready to go out, and I saw this life-size print. And I just said, that's it. That's my wall. So happy coincidence, because she reminds me so much of Stella Stevens, our unexplainedly single PhD in astrophysics holding secretary. And so this is what's going to go on the accent wall. This will be the first thing you see when you come in the building. I just think that is so badass. I've got, she goes head to foot, actually. But that is the whole thing. And then in the orange down to the right, we're going to put Stratosphere, which is the name of the production company. That's skewing a little yellow on the feedback. It's actually bright orange. God, you know what's funny? Let me see if I can do something here. We got this. I got this eyesight control, which allows me to. It's a little app that allows me to control that only affects the camera. Oh well. Anyway, so yeah. So she's on the front door there, and I just think she's just awesome. Somebody just asked who did the art. Hang on a minute. I'll go find. I got it right here. Oh no. Oh no. Hang on a second. I thought I pulled the mic plug, but it was only the headphone plug. This, as I said, honestly, I beat myself up over the worst produced show on the internet, and it is. But a lot of it is this Ustream thing, as I've said 100 times before, is very, very, very picky. So yeah, I got the art right here. See who did the art for her. She's really cool. Here she is. Apparently, she's a character. Kit Carter Galactic Ranger, but I just call her Astro Girl because I love her. I think she looks a lot. Let me just get this a little better here. Very suggestive of our Stella Stevens, just by happy coincidence. And it's Kit Carter, and there's a whole comic book series. And the artist is, golly, I can't read it. Somebody will have it for me in the comment section. But yeah, really cool. So it's going to be a life-size cutout. It's going to be right on the wall, first thing you see when you walk in, and it's going to be groovy. I really am looking forward to that in a big way. I think it's just going to be fantastic. So that made Comic-Con worth it just itself. I love it. I loved it. The second I saw it, I loved it. So so much for that. So we got a lot to talk about tonight, and I suppose I'll just preface this by saying something I probably should just preface every show and everything I do is I don't have any idea what I'm talking about. You know, I'm not a really... That's really about all you need to know. I don't have any special background, but I do read a lot about these things. So the stuff about the space combat tonight is really just my opinion, but it's an opinion based on a lot of people who I've read and studied and who seem to make sense to me. So we'll see. Anyway, let's get going. So the first question, because I think this question determines everything, came from our friend Max Wild. And regarding space combat, he said, how can one make a spacecraft stealthy? And everything I'm about to talk about tonight, again, this is just kind of an amalgamation of a lot of stuff that I've read on this subject. But everything I'm going to talk about in terms of what follows is predicated on the idea, Max, that you cannot make a spacecraft stealthy. I watched this battle go on a bunch. I had a lot of people comment on things. I did a lot of research in a lot of different areas, and there were one camp that said, no, you can make a ship stealthy. You have radiators and coolers, and you have mask it and so on. Certainly you can make it stealthy in terms of active radar, in terms of not being able to reflect a pinging and reduce the radar cross-section, and it's very, very far away, and so on and so forth. So I'm not talking about active radar reflection. I'm talking about its signature, its passive signature. And I became pretty convinced that that there is no way to do it. The argument that seemed to have the most strength was the argument that space is so cold, it's just a degree or two above absolute zero, and that any kind of life support or any kind of electricity, electronics, thrusters, anything is pretty hard to do. There's even been talk about shielding things like, somebody just pointed out here, Monster printed out that you could, shield it from one side. But even then, I don't think it really works, because we are talking about the background temperature being so cold And here's really the trick, right? The fact of the matter is our sensors now are so good. Our sensor technology today is so good. We communicate with the Voyager probe, and the Voyager probe it's transmitting with about as much power as one of those old Christmas tree light bulbs. One of them. It's already in interstellar space. We're able to get that signal. We have incredibly sophisticated sensors. People think that, space is so big and so dark, so you think, great place to hide. But it's actually... Aaron Lopresti is the artist. Thank you very much, Sarge56. That is, in fact, correct. Aaron Lopresti. Did a great job with our Astro Girl here with Kit Carter. Space is it's big and it's dark, but it's cold, and reaction propulsion is not cold, and power plants are not cold, and humans aren't cold, and the little shell you got to put the humans in aren't cold. And again, I'm just going to tell you what I heard, but I watched a lot of stuff going back and forth about ways you could cool the heat signature down, and do all this other stuff. One of the things that people don't understand really about space, and it took me a long time to really fully grasp it to the degree that I grasp it now. I still don't think I've really completely got the picture. But you talk about things like radiating heat off into space and use radiators and so on. Well, first of all, the radiators get hot and they light up. But the thing about space is it's a vacuum, and people don't understand this. They think that, I'm speaking for myself here, thinking vacuum is freezing cold. Actually, the vacuum is what works inside a thermos bottle. They have an inner bottle, and then there's an outer bottle, and in between it is nothing. It's nothing. So there's nothing to conduct the heat, either into or out of the thermal difference. So space is a perfect vacuum. Getting rid of heat in space is an enormous problem. It's a very, very, very big problem. So what we're really dealing with here, I think, is a problem where I'm not saying that space isn't big enough and you couldn't get far enough away so that you couldn't get lost in the just extreme size of the heavens. But by the time we're talking about anything even close to weapons range, close to weapons range, probably within the solar system, or certainly within the inner solar system, you've got enough of a heat temperature to be detectable. And I'm assuming that that's going to be the case. So much as I liked the model, when I say the model, the sort of the operational model, much as I love the model of space combat as being virtually identical to submarine combat, that's the way it was sold in Traveller 2300, which is a great, great, great game. It was a game that came out after the original Traveller, and they had a great combat system in there. And in Traveller 2300, everything was stealth. It was all about detection. They were playing it like submarines, low radar signature, low heat signature, all that other stuff. But I heard enough compelling arguments to say no. It is, in fact, you're going to know where everybody is. So, Max, I don't think you can make a spacecraft stealthy. Not within shooting range anywhere, anything close to shooting range. I just don't think it's possible, and I'm going to proceed from that assumption. Richard Browd, sorry, Richard, maybe it's Browd. I'm going to turn this off here. Asks, try to get these in some kind of related order. He says, I urge you posit that whoever gets to fire the first shot will win. What I was actually saying, Richard, was that's what happens in the case of submarines. I wasn't trying to make that case for space combat at all. In submarines, as a general rule, the person who gets that first shot off wins. A torpedo detonation against a submarine is pretty much the end of the game. So I wasn't talking about space combat, I was talking about subs there. I argue that detection using known sensor methods can be easily defeated. A large sail-like shield pointed in a likely direction of enemy can be used to shield heat and deflect electromagnetic radiation. Today we want our spacecraft to be easily... let's see if I can turn that off too. Nope. Where's that buzz come? No, I'm not going to worry about it. Today we want our spacecraft to be easily detectable. Tomorrow we might not want that. Detection's always been the very first priority in warfare. This we agree about completely. So detection is everything. When you're talking about hitting another vessel, what you really have to do is first you have to detect it. Now I'm going to go back to a term that I did learn from all the studying of submarine warfare that I did. And there are experts out here. I mean, most of you guys who've seen, I know many of you guys out there actually served on submarines. So again, forgive me for hacking my way around this as an amateur. But basically, you have different steps. The first step is to detect something. You got to know there's a sub out there. You got an idea, you get a sound, and the sound is the detection. Okay, there's another enemy combatant out there. We can do that with the sensors in space. We know there's a vessel out there. But before you can shoot, you have to get to an intermediate stage between detection and firing, and that stage is called the targeting solution. You have to have a targeting solution, and a targeting solution means that detection means we know that on a bearing of 320 degrees, let's say, we have a signal. We've detected something, but that's not a targeting solution. That's not enough information to shoot on. The targeting solution is the bearing and the range. And the more accurately we have the bearing and the range, the more likely we are to hit our target. So it's detection first, then targeting solution, then weapons fire. And then once the weapons are fired, there's some interesting stuff that happens, which I'd like to get into in a minute too. So the targeting solution is part of the issue. And by the way, I'm so glad I just remembered this. I got most of this from a guy who will send some of us back. Those of you who've been kind of in the following me since the eject days know the debt that I owe to a guy named Steve Denbest, who had an incredible blog called USS Clueless, and I think it's still there. He really just gave up many, many years ago, just gave up the game and got really into anime. But Steve Denbest, one of the most brilliant guys I've ever met, and I saw him go into unbelievable detail, and he really knows his stuff. As he was a cell phone engineer, and so he's very, very, very good with electromagnetic detection and that kind of thing. He's the one who convinced me pretty solidly. I did a number of posts about this, that you would not be able to hide a vessel. Certainly not to any useful purpose. You just couldn't do it. You space is so cold, and people are on board, and electronics are on board, and everything is on board. So he made the case pretty compellingly. But I just wanted to credit Steve Denbest because so much of this comes from him. So we've got a detection, and then we have a targeting solution. And the targeting solution, as I understand it, is not just kind of this binary thing like, oh, we have a targeting solution. The targeting solution is refined. And on submarines, the longer you're tracking the target, usually the more precise the bearing gets, and you have a better idea of the range. Especially if you're moving along a baseline, you can get a better idea about the range just by triangulating your own baseline and looking at the shift and the position and where the thing is. So as time goes on, you're detecting, and then you're refining your targeting solution. And the more refined your targeting solution is, the better chance you have of hitting the target. So it's Cheezomatic. Thanks very much, Winston Smith, Room 101. The coolest screen name of all time, by the way, Winston Smith, Room 101. It's Cheezomatic. It's CHIZUMATIC.me.new. Anyway, Cheezomatic. Steve Denbest is awesome. So we know where the target is. We have an idea of its range and bearing. We got a decent targeting solution. Then what happens? Well, as it turns out, Jackson Jillian asks a question which I think Denbest talked about. I don't know if I heard other people talk about it, but this is really important to understand. It's a really deep subject. And Jackson Jillian asks, broadsides or precision shots? This may have been some of the back. Actually, you know what? I think this was on the background of 2300. I forget who wrote. If somebody could tell me who wrote the space combat thing on 2300, I will know the name when I see it. It was beautifully thought out. Beautifully thought out. But here's what's interesting about this very simple looking but actually extremely deep question. Broadsides or precision shots? And so what Jackson Jillian is really asking here is, in order to inflict lethal damage onto a target, do we want volume of fire or do we want accuracy of fire? And the answer is you always want accuracy of fire. Always. I've not been able to find an exception to this rule. What does this mean? Well, if you look at naval warfare, 400 years ago, during the Battle of the Armada, 1588, I want to say, you have these Spanish galleons and smaller British ships, and they had broadsides, and these weapons were extraordinarily inaccurate and relatively short range, these cannons. They couldn't make them super big. They were either solid, in the case of the Spanish Armada, they're just a solid hunk of iron, just a bullet, basically. So they basically did this. What they would do is, in order to inflict enough damage on the enemy once they got into range, because the range was pretty limited, since they couldn't put too much destructive power onto any one of these things, they loaded up the volume. They added the volume of fire. So when you shoot more projectiles, you're more likely to hit the target even if your weapon isn't accurate. And when you do hit the target, the more you hit it, the more damage you do. A great way to think about this on land is to imagine during the Revolutionary War, even the Civil War. I'll get to that in a minute. The Civil War is a little bit different. During the Revolutionary War, you had smoothbore muskets. And these things didn't fire rifled bullets, so they weren't spinning for stabilization. They came out of the barrel of the musket and they immediately started to corkscrew around. And so even at a relatively short range, 20, 30 yards, you had a pretty good chance to miss a guy standing there. So in order to hit a target with either inaccurate cannons or inaccurate musket, non-rifled musket balls, you have to shoot a lot. You have to put out a lot of volume of fire. So you have rank after rank after rank after rank of guys standing there, blowing out these inaccurate musket rounds. And you launch this hail of bullets at a densely packed enemy, and some of them will hit. Same thing with naval warfare. You've got volume of fire to make up for the fact that your weapon is inaccurate, and also for the fact that each individual round is not doing a tremendous amount of damage. A musket ball doesn't do it does enough damage to kill a guy, but it doesn't do as much damage as, let's say, a rocket launcher does, or a 500-pound bomb, or a nuclear weapon. So, as you start to get out of the age of wooden ships and into rifled cannons on warships, on ironclads during the Civil War, you start to get into this compromise where you now have fewer weapons. I want to say that the Virginia, not the Merrimack, it was the Virginia, formerly the Merrimack, the Confederate ironclad Virginia, which fought that classic battle in Hampton Roads with the Union vessel, the Monitor. Instead of broadsides where you had, 200, 300 weapons in some cases. Now you're talking about the Monitor had 2 cannons, I want to say, in a single turret. Later Monitors had dual turrets. I want to say the Virginia had 9 cannons, something in that ballpark. I think 3 on a side, 1 facing forward, 2 facing forward, 1 facing back, something like that. 9, 10 cannons. They're rifled, so they're like Dahlgrens and stuff, I think, and they're more accurate. So since they're more accurate, you don't need to carry as many because you're going to hit the target more likely because it's more accurate. And instead of just shooting a big hunk of iron ball, by the time you start getting into rifle cannons, you start getting into shells. You start getting into a projectile that carries explosive charge with it, and those are a lot more dangerous. So you go from broadsides with 300 cannon down to broadsides with 7, 8, 9 cannon on something like the Virginia, something like that. And the similar thing is also happening in ground combat. Civil War was so deadly because they were fighting tactics using engagement ranges that were appropriate for musket balls, and they were using dense packs of guys who are not hiding under cover or using concealment, as in the Revolutionary War. But between the Revolutionary War and the Civil War, there was kind of a halfway development called the mini ball. The mini ball was a really kind of a brilliant design. It was a spherical round, and you had to ram it in. You had to pour in your gunpowder charge, and then ram that bullet home. But the mini ball had kind of a concave bottom to it, and when the thing was fired, that concave bottom ballooned out just a little bit, came in contact with the rifling on the inside of the musket, and it was a rifled musket ball. It was still a muzzle loader. You still had to put in one round at a time and ram it down home there, but the mini ball had considerably greater accuracy than the regular musket ball, and the reason the Civil War was so deadly was because people were standing at distances appropriate to an extremely inaccurate weapon. Then all of a sudden, we got all these guys in a line shooting at a whole bunch of other guys in line. Now the weapon is much more accurate than it used to be. It was horrible. It was a brutal thing, and the tactics hadn't caught up with the technology. It's exactly what happened in World War I 100 years ago. So now you can take it even further. Now, by the time you get into the era of fairly modern battleships with HMS Dreadnought, now you're talking about a ship of the line that has, well, let's see, what the Iowa class has 9, right? 9 cannons, 3 guns per turret, 3 turrets on the Iowa class. I want to say 2 up front and 2 at the rear. Sounds right to me. So now you've gone down from 300 guns to 9. And each one of these 16, 17, 18-inch guns can shoot a projectile 20 miles, and the projectile weighs the same thing as a Volkswagen. It carries tremendous explosive charge. You don't have to hit a guy too much harder than with one of these big things, and it does an awful lot of damage. And in addition to the offensive war that's going on, where we're constantly making our offensive weapons better, the defense is also getting better. The armor is getting better, much better. The wooden ships had no metal armor. They used to hang chains over the side, a chain-clad ship, and sometimes I said that was cheating. These guys used to take metal chain and just drape it over the side of a wooden hull, and that would deflect shot. And then you get the first ironclads in the Civil War, and then by the time you get to the Dreadnought class in early pre-World War I years, first modern battleship, the Dreadnought, it's got steel-plated armor. That armor gets thicker too. But the point I'm trying to make here is that, Jackson, is that as technology increases, what we're doing is we're increasing the accuracy of fire at the expense of volume of fire. We're shooting fewer rounds of longer ranged, more accurate, and more deadly projectiles. It's happening in the sea, and it's happening simultaneously on land. Now we get to the point where a modern destroyer, for all intents and purposes, doesn't have a gun at all. I know they carry a gun, but in serious combat against a serious enemy, that gun is essentially useless. You never want to get a ship within the range of that gun. It's a pretty small gun. It's useful for taking out smaller vessels or for doing some ground precision strikes, that kind of thing. But nobody certainly thinks that a modern destroyer has that gun, that little tiny gun turret on the top in the front, is its primary weapon. By the time you get into the modern era, now you're talking about, I'll go to the most extreme case because it's proving the point. Nowadays, in modern naval combat, you have one weapon. You have one nuclear-tipped weapon, or a harpoon. Doesn't even need to be nuclear-tipped. You fire one harpoon missile, and if that harpoon missile hits a destroyer or a frigate, gets it just right, that's probably the end of that. One torpedo, one Mark 48 torpedo exploding underneath a frigate or destroyer, that ship's done. So all of this just to say, and the same thing again mirrored on the ground in ground combat. A squad of four guys today pack a lot more firepower and a lot more lethality than a regiment of Civil War soldiers did. One guy with a saw and 2-3 guys with with AR-15s or M4s or whatever can put more firepower on an enemy at a longer range more accurately than an entire regiment used to be able to. You got the Standard missiles and the Aegis class stuff coming off of the frigates and the destroyers and all this other stuff. It's extremely precise, extremely deadly, lethal weapons. So this is an important point to understand. Much as I loved the Battlestar Galactica reboot, when you see hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of weapons going off, it's like every now and I didn't really watch it just super carefully. Every now and then there would be like a nuke. We'll get to nukes in space in a minute. So you can generally say that you definitely want fewer, more accurate weapons simply because they weigh less. And it's just that simple. They weigh less. In space, you have to get everything into space. You have to get it on the ship, and then you have to accelerate it. And then when you want it, where you get it where you want it, you got to decelerate it. And to accelerate and decelerate that weapon takes fuel. And to accelerate and decelerate the fuel takes more fuel. So, there you go. So the fewer weapons you can carry, the lighter you are, the more efficient you are, the more effective you are, the more delta V you have, the more options you have in terms of range and so on. So that's another case that I'm going to just assume to be the case that we're going to be dealing with smaller numbers of extremely lethal and highly accurate weapons. So where does that take us to? Matthew T. I tried to get some general order on these things. Matthew T. Bradshaw says, which would be more feasible, a large weapon to split a ship apart and completely destroy it, or smaller projectiles to kill by depressurizing and then kind of looting the remains. What I'm going to interpret that to mean is where we're going to go now to the next level, and that is what general broad categories of weapons can we expect to see, and what are their strengths and weaknesses. So we could pretty much break this down into 3 different categories, four categories, with some hybrids in there, obviously. First category would be directed energy weapons, and a perfect example of that would be a laser, or a maser, which is a microwave laser. It doesn't have to be a visible light laser. Some frequencies are more effective, not invisible light, but a laser. A laser is basically just an extremely a concentrated beam of coherent light. For those of you not familiar with lasers, I worked with lasers for 20 years in the Miami Planetarium. They're fantastically cool things, unbelievably cool lasers. When a light bulb, like the ones you see around here, get turned on, like the light switch in your dining room right now, that is emitting a light it appears to be white light because all different frequencies of light are coming off. Little blue frequencies are coming off, and longer red frequencies are coming off. Heat's coming off, all that other stuff. But a laser only generates one frequency. That's why laser color is so pure. A laser red, that helium neon red, I want to say, is just ruby red. It's ruby red. It's such a red because it is a specific wavelength, and one wavelength only. That's a definition of a laser. It's light amplification through the stimulated emission of radiation. Used to use rubies, and then they used gas lasers and so on. But basically, in a nutshell, what happens is you have a light source in between two mirrors. This is old school. It's improved since then. These photons of light would bounce back and forth, and they become coherent. They'd all be in the same frequency, and then they'd go through the little gate, and out they'd come. So a laser is capable of producing a fair amount of power. Now, it takes a ton of power to generate enough heat, energy out of a laser just to burn through a regular sheet of paper. I mean, here's a regular piece of paper. We had I want to say it was about a watt. I don't remember, honestly, to be honest. We had a krypton argon laser, greenish blue beam, and if you put a piece of paper in there, it would burn through it in about a second or so, with light matches and stuff. But it wasn't going through walls or, taking the paint off of things. So you need a tremendous amount of energy and cooling and stuff to go in there to get that laser to put enough energy out. So here's the advantage to a laser. A laser is instantaneous. So that shot, actually, I take it back. It's obviously not instantaneous. It's instantaneous in engagement ranges on modern battlefields, but in space, it is not instantaneous. It travels at the speed of light. The laser is the fastest weapon that's available because nothing can exceed the speed of light. So you shoot a laser at something, nothing is going to get to the target faster than a laser, let me put it that way. Everything else is slower than that. So at relatively close ranges, and we're talking about relatively close ranges, the laser's got a delay of less than a second. It's about a second to the moon or so. Second and a half, something like that to the moon. 186,000 miles a second. The moon's 270,000 miles away, or 230, I forget. Anyway, you get the idea. But in relatively close ranges, the beam gets there fast. Now that's good because the faster that the beam gets to the target, the less time the target has to move out of the way. So if I shoot a laser at something that's 10,000 miles away, it's going to get there almost instantly. If I throw a softball at that thing, then there's got plenty of time to get out of the way. The softball is on a course, and that course can't change if it's a simple projectile. So lasers have the advantage of being on target fast. And lasers also have an advantage in terms of, because they're so quick, they're likely to be probably, I think, the most effective longer range weapon. Now, there are problems with lasers, and the primary problem with laser in the atmosphere is the atmosphere. We don't have to worry about that in space. When we shoot down incoming rounds in the atmosphere, we actually have a laser that pokes a hole in the atmosphere, heats the atmosphere up, opens up the atmosphere just gets heated and expands, and then the kill laser goes right through that little annular beam, but in space we don't have to worry about that. But we do have something that there's just nothing we can do about, and that is the inverse square law, which means that if you double the distance to a target, you reduce the amount of energy delivered by a factor of 4. Double the target, you get 1/4 of the energy. So a laser has a problem, and that is that the further away you get, the less energy gets delivered to the target. Now, I'm not sure exactly if the inverse square law works exactly that way on a laser, or whether that's more of a general radiation kind of thing. But I know that obviously the further away you are, the less energy you deliver. That's not true for a bullet in space. If a bullet, because bullets don't slow down to air resistance. If I shoot a bullet at something at 10 miles away in space or something at 10 feet away in space, it's traveling at the same speeds, packing the same amount of energy. So a projectile weapon, which is the second category of weapon, energy weapons like lasers are first, projectile weapons like a bullet are second. artillery round, a shell, whatever you want to call it. Those have an advantage and disadvantage too. The disadvantage is they're much, much slower than the laser, so it's harder to hit the target because it takes longer for the weapon to get there. But it does not suffer from the loss of energy. So you can put a lot of energy into that projectile, and I think that makes them the deadliest of the weapons, and we'll get all this stuff coming up in a minute. We'll kind of get all these things working together. The third type of weapon is a hybrid of projectile and energy weapon, and it's a particle weapon. So basically what a particle weapon is doing is it's shooting bullets, but they're not material bullets in the sense that we understand it. They're neutrons, or a charged particle weapon would be something that shoots a stream of protons. Now you've got little subatomic particles, and you're using a particle accelerator to get these things up to very, very high energies, and you shoot them at a target, and they go pretty fast, not as fast as the speed of light, but pretty fast, and they put a fairly good amount of energy onto the target. So they're kind of a hybrid between a laser and a particle weapon. They're not actual particles the way we understand particles, but they are impacting. They're putting individual subatomic nuclei on the target, and that kinetic energy is not being degraded, as I understand it. And the final class of weapons, the fourth class of weapons, is kind of in a world all their own, and that's missiles. Missiles are different than a projectile weapon because the definition would be a projectile weapon is not guided, or at least not maneuverable in the way that we understand a missile to be maneuverable. So a missile is lovely because if you have a missile, you can put the the projectile weapon on the missile, get the missile at close range, blow up the warhead, and then have those little BBs or whatever tear the ship up. So it's basically, if the ship is moving, the missile's following the ship, and the missile gets right into firing range, then it detonates its warhead, and off you go. It's kind of like a torpedo. So it's guided, and it tracks the target and can deliver it to the target, unlike a projectile weapon, which once it leaves the barrel, is on its way. And if it misses, it misses. So if you were to kind of get this simplified, you might be able to say something like this. If you're at a certain amount of range, you can hit it with a laser, hit it probably more accurately because it's moving quicker. It's quicker to get on target, and a laser beam is something that just can pulse or complete, steady state beam. You can finesse the targeting and get it on the target. It's a long range weapon. The downside is it's not terribly lethal compared to some of the other three, and it's also a little easier to defend against. If you want to stop a laser from hurting you, if you're the enemy ship and I'm the friendly ship and you shoot a laser at me, what I really want to do is I just want to do this. I want to put something between me and the laser. And that will help a lot, as it turns out. So one of the things you can do if you really want to defend your ship against a laser attack is you can make the surface shiny, reflect some of that energy back into space. You can make the surface ablative, like the back of a heat shield on a re-entry capsule, so that, yes, it is getting heated, but the heat is not damaging your inner pressure hull. It's hitting a very heat-resistant material and vaporizing that, and the energy is going into this heat shield, and then that what's the word I'm looking for? Ablates away. It just basically bubbles off and takes the heat with it. You can also do something to defend against lasers. It's really cool, and I got this in the original Traveler thing. The original Traveler game had a defensive weapon called a sandcaster. And a sandcaster was just a little cylinder filled with what they called sand, but I suppose glitter would work about as well as anything else. And basically, if I'm on a trajectory and I know my enemy's out there and he's got a laser weapon, he's shooting at me, I'm going to launch this canister, a bit like a depth charge in a way, along that same axis. It doesn't have to go but a couple feet from the ship. It doesn't have to go all the way to the shooting ship. So just get it off of the hull. And then it dissipates. You don't want it to explode too fast. You actually want it to just kind of open up a little bit. And so if I can put a cloud of glitter between me and the ship that's shooting at me with an energy weapon, that glitter will disperse and absorb a fair amount of that energy. It doesn't have to be glitter. It could be a cloud of black ink, something to absorb the energy, so that beam has to go through that stuff to get to me. So there's a lot of ways to defend against a laser. If I, on the other hand, am moving at 17,000 miles an hour and you're moving at 20,000 miles an hour on a different vector, and I take a BB gun or something the size of this. In fact, it doesn't have to be the size of this. It could be this. If I have a baseball and my baseball hits your vessel at 20,000 miles an hour, that's the end of your vessel. It's all over. Game over. Done. The kinetic energy is so high because the relative velocities are often so high. So now we talk about a projectile weapon. A projectile weapon, in my opinion, is much more lethal because, especially a shotgun blast, if you have a handful of BBs that are coming onto a target at 20,000 miles an hour, you will just shred that vehicle. You'll shred it. And you can talk about armoring a vehicle, but folks, I really don't buy this idea of armor in the degree, to the same sense of armor that we talk about with battleships. And the reason is weight. You would need so much armor to stop that kind of kinetic energy. I just don't know how you'd move it. I suppose you could have a battle station that consists of an asteroid that doesn't, something super massive, but that has its own disadvantages because this whole thing's very complex. That's why it's such a fun subject to talk about. So in other words, if I can put a projectile weapon, it doesn't even have to explode. A lot of the super advanced stuff that we're dealing with now, for instance, the Navy's developing an electromagnetic gun, Gauss gun. Sometimes people call it a mass driver. Sometimes people call it. But basically, there's talk about putting it on a destroyer, and this is a weapon that instead of using an explosive chemical charge where you blow up some gunpowder or cordite or whatever, and that expanding gas pushes a projectile out a sealed barrel, there's a limit to how much energy that can take. It's limited by the chemical energy of the explosive you're using. It's limited by the ability of the barrel to take the pressure. I want to say that a regular handgun, when you fire a .45 automatic, I'm not sure about this number, somebody out there undoubtedly will be, but when I fire a .45 automatic pistol, the pressure inside that chamber is 30,000 atmospheres. But there are limits to how much energy you can put into chemicals, and there's limits to how much energy your barrel will take because it forces acting on the barrel. But there's no limit to how much energy you can impart on a projectile if you are using a series of magnets to accelerate it. They don't even have to be technically in a barrel. They can just be a little wireframe thing and whoop. So now they've got, I've seen the test footage. It's absolutely mind-boggling. They've got weapons, hypersonic weapons, that are accelerating these things to, I don't know, is it Mach 7, 8, 9, 10 maybe, something like that. And in that case, the weapon is just a spike, aluminum spike. It's like a pair of scissors. It's about this big, and just a piece of aluminum, or maybe it's titanium, or maybe it's depleted uranium. I don't know what it is, but they accelerate this thing along, and the part that they use to accelerate the metallic part, the iron part, the sabot, just separates, and this hypersonic spike just goes at incredible speeds. I love my audience because they're so damn smart. Ash37 tells me that a 45 ACP has 21,000 psi on the inside when you pull the trigger. Anyway, so this hypersonic spike goes downrange, and it doesn't have a warhead. It doesn't have explosives. It doesn't carry anything in it that blows up. You just hit something at about Mach 7, and it's taking, because F equals mv squared, right? Force equals mass times velocity squared. So even though the mass is relatively low, the velocity is through the ceiling, and it puts a tremendous amount of energy on the target. So kind of keeping track of our little ducks here. Energy weapons, good long range, can fire repeatedly, probably more accurate, more likely to hit the target, easier to defend against through either reflection, ablation, or blockage. A projectile weapon, on the other hand, if I get one of these hypersonic spikes up, and Mach 7 is what is that? That's it's about 50,000 miles an hour, right? Something like that, maybe a little more, somewhere in that general vicinity. Force equals mass times acceleration. Sorry about that, I got my physics wrong. But the faster it's moving, the more force it carries with it. So you get the point, right? The point I'm trying to make here is if you get hit with a kinetic energy weapon if you get hit with a baseball or an anvil or a bowling ball or anything like that at high speed, it's game over. I am not aware of how you would defend against that. You're just packing so much energy and so much force that if it hits you, you're done. So, 5,000 miles an hour, yeah. But we're talking about orbital velocity, 17,000 miles an hour. Crossing vectors could be as high as 20, 30,000 miles an hour. You take a handful of ball bearings. Let me just put it to you this way. If I take a handful of ball bearings and I throw them out the window and we're on a relatively decent crossing vector, that handful of ball bearings, just by me just tossing them out the window, will shred your ship pretty much effectively. And I don't know that there's any way to defend against that. So energy weapons tend to be longer range, less damage. Projectile weapons tend to be shorter range, more damage. The particle beam weapons like the proton beams or the neutron beams are kind of in the middle. And the missile, of course, is lovely because the missile can deliver the kinetic energy weapon, or the missile can deliver. There's a variant in the Traveler game where a missile delivered a laser. The missile would actually fly itself close to the target, and then when it got close enough to the target, it would basically explode, and the energy of that explosion would drive a very quick laser pulse, and that laser pulse would be delivered at close range, so you lose the inverse square law. So the missile basically gets your weapon to the target. The problem with the missile is it's easier to defend against a missile. You can jam a missile, you can spoof a missile, you can decoy a missile, and you can shoot down a missile. If a missile's moving through space on a thrust vector, it's moving slowly relative to an energy weapon and probably slowly relative to a projectile weapon. So if a missile's coming at you, you've got time to either spoof it, decoy it, the same thing, jam it, or shoot it down. So all the stuff back and forth is really cool, because you don't end up with a solution where it's like, hey, here's your weapon. It's like, what do you use? I suspect ideally you'd want them all. So if I had an unlimited budget, when I say budget, I don't just mean money. If I had an unlimited energy budget, what I would do is I would have a very, very, very large honkin' laser on that thing. And I would use that at long range, and I'd just start damaging the guy. I try to blind his sensors. I try to poke holes in his hull if I could. Generally speaking, as a general acceptance, you would go into battle depressurized. If you know you're going to get into a shooting match, the first thing you'd probably do is depressurize the ship, because the last thing you want is for that explosive decompression to come along. It's put a hole in the pressurized compartment, all kinds of bad things happen. So everybody gets into their suits and you depressurize the ship, so a hole in the hull is just a hole in the hull. Fix it later. So I'd start hitting them at long range with this energy weapon, and as we're closing, that's another thing we'll get to in a minute, then you'd start maybe moving to particle beam weapons, which are a little less accurate but deliver more energy. And then when you got close enough so that you'd think that a dead falling projectile had a chance, then you just chuck a massive amount of ball bearings at this dude, and or one of these hypersonic rail spikes, and you hit him with that, and it's probably game over. It's kind of like that torpedo hit in submarines. So now we get to yet another one of these layers of awesomeness, and that's this. We can, if we assume that all these assumptions are correct, that we know where the enemy's going to be because they're easily detectable. I'm going to backtrack for 1 second here. One of the big problems is at the kind of engagement range we're talking about in space. We talked about how first detection and then the targeting solution. The targeting solution is a location of where the enemy is. Do we know where it is? The more precise our targeting solution, the more accurately we can direct our weapons at that spot. But we're still talking about large ranges and relatively small vessels in an enormous volume of space. So the targeting solution gets refined and refined and refined, but we're really still talking about a sphere of its potential, a sphere that you're trying to reduce the size of. That's probably an ellipse, actually, now that I think about it. But you're trying to reduce the area where that ship might be. We know it can't be outside of this because it doesn't have the delta V, let's say, or we've got our sensors on it. We're trying to refine that targeting solution, get it smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller so we can send our weapons more accurately. But we have another problem too, and that is the actual aiming of the weapon. Nobody really thinks about this, but if you're talking about a beam that by the time it gets to, I don't know, let's say it's 10,000 miles. I'm just making something up. The beam's the size of your fist, let's say. The ship is maybe the width of a room, or the width of a submarine, let's say. how much of a fraction of a degree ever to one side or the other at that kind of range, the smallest fraction of a degree, means you just missed. You just missed. So the way to think of it is to think of it as an expanding slice of pie, right? The further away you are, the wider those two things get. That's why a goalie in soccer, which is apparently a game that people play, although I don't know if adults actually play it. But in soccer, when a guy is rushing the goal, what the goalie will do is he'll actually run towards the guy. Why would he run towards the guy? He's running towards the guy because he's trying to. I put my mic down here for a second. What he's trying to do is he's trying to narrow that angle down. He's trying to get in. He's trying to take that wedge to the guy. So a way to think of this is, if you think of this divergent thing, is imagine a goalie in a soccer goal. In a goal, he's standing there in a goal, and you're standing ready to take a penalty shot. Okay, you can go 10 feet to the right of him, 10 feet to the left of him, and you get net. If that same goalie is standing directly in front of the ball, he blocks every shot, right? Because he's taken up the entire wedge. And if you move the goal 2 or 3 or 4 times the distance back, what you find is the goalie's the same size, but the net is now 10 times the size. So there's that much more room to get it in there. So you're talking about, as Rich says, fractions of an arc second. If you take a degree, if we take the entire width of the compass rose from 0 degrees all the way around to 0 degrees, it's 360 degrees. And if we take 1 degree and divide it up into 60 parts, that's 60. It's a minute. It's a minute. You divide the 60th up into another 60 parts. That's 1 degree. It's 1 arc second. And we're talking about fractions of that. It's incredible, really, the difficulty of having to actually physically aim the energy weapon over any kind of distance. Enormous problem, big problem, big problem. Again, if you've got a particle projectile weapon, you're not going to shoot a shell or a spike. You really want to shoot a shotgun blast. That's why people shoot shotguns at birds. If you had to try to hit a bird with an AR round, you probably wouldn't get as many birds as you would with a shotgun round. Shotgun round disperses. And yes, it's true that fewer particles would hit and that less of the mass is delivered, but you're going to hit something, generally speaking, if you get it in the same direction. I imagine you'd want your projectile weapons to be a bit more like a shotgun kind of thing. Maybe it's a canister weapon like they had in the old cannons, where you shoot a canister along the predicted route of the enemy vessel, and when the canister got to a certain distance, it would explode, and then it would turn into a shotgun blast. So you got this whole thing going on. But this is my analysis. As I said, I don't want to keep constantly, backpedaling on this. This is just my opinion based on what I've read. So what you've got is energy weapons at long range and kinetic energy and kinetic weapons, projectile weapons, at short range, and missiles are either here or there depending on how good your anti-missile system is. I suspect that missiles are not going to be effective in space because I think they'd be too easy to shoot down. They'd be tremendously effective against an unarmed ship or a non-defense ship. But when you talk about point defense systems and you talk about the fact that you can see this missile coming, you talk about having defensive weapons, energy weapons to take out incoming missiles, I don't have a lot of confidence in weapons being able to get super close. So let's talk about missiles just real quick. You think, well, what does a missile do today? Well, a missile hits a target and it explodes. And most of the time we're talking about a chemical explosion. But if we were serious, we'd put a missile on somebody with a nuclear weapon or a torpedo with a nuclear weapon. And we don't have to think about that. Even a small little tactical nuclear weapon, tactical depth charge, tactical sub-rocket, tactical ASROC, a nuclear weapon on a standard missile. You put a nuclear weapon on a vessel at sea, you're probably going to prove your point. But the reason nuclear weapons work so well here on Earth is because they generate tremendous amount of heat. So they do heat damage, and then they do radiation damage through the heavy particles that are coming out of the thing. But what the real damage of a nuclear weapon is blast. So when a nuclear weapon goes off over a city and knocks all these buildings down, it's not the nuclear weapon that's knocking the buildings down. What's knocking the buildings down and doing all of that destruction is the air. It's the air that's doing the damage. It's overpressure of the air. You'd be amazed at how little overpressure. 2 or 3 psi is just astonishing. So what the nuclear weapon or any bomb does, basically, when a bomb goes off, remember, you're just talking about a bomb casing is the size of a, suitcase or whatever, size of a a big bomb might be the size of a washer dryer or something like that. So when the thing explodes, pieces of metal come off and there's some shrapnel damage. But that's not what does the damage even on a conventional bomb. What happens when a bomb goes off is all of this energy is released. A conventional weapon, that's not a whole lot of heat, but what it does is it releases energy and it moves an enormous volume of air out. And as that air moves out, it compresses. And if you look at certain footage, especially in Vietnam, because Vietnam air was very humid, you can see these rings, these blast rings, just coming off. And that's what's doing the damage. It's moving air. So it's this giant wall of air, and you compress air enough, it becomes pretty dense. It becomes as hard as concrete. And if you don't think that air gets dense when you move fast enough, take a look out the window of your airplane next time you're flying along. You and 300 other people in a 747, you got almost 1 million pounds of gross weight. Up into the air and off you go. What's holding you up? Air. Doesn't seem possible, does it really, if you think about it? It just doesn't seem possible that the stuff that we move around in could support you and nearly 1 million pounds of weight in a 747. Happens every single day, thousands of times a day. It's because when that aircraft starts to get up to 140, 150, 160 miles an hour, the difference in air pressure gets to be significant. By the time you get to cruising speeds, air is pretty dense. A great example would be if you ever, I don't know if a kid who's never done this, I certainly don't know any boys never did at my age. You're driving down the road, you roll down the window, you stick your hand out of the car at 60 miles an hour, and you can feel the air pushing your arm back. Because now at 60 miles an hour, the air has some force. You can feel the resistance of it, getting a lot more molecules per second, basically. It's just that simple. So the problem is, in space, a nuclear weapon or any kind of explosion doesn't do any blast damage. It does some kinds of damage, but it doesn't do blast damage. So this idea of the big boom is not going to happen. You drop a bomb in space, it doesn't blow things up. It just creates little particles of shrapnel. You just don't do the damage because it's the air that does the damage. You can do electromagnetic pulse damage, as Astronerd says. So EMT damage is significant. Presumably you'd harden your electronics against the electromagnetic pulse. Presumably, you'd harden it against radiation if you're in space in the first place. So what would you, if you could actually get a missile to a target and you detonated a nuclear weapon, what would it do? It would do surprisingly little structural damage. It would not blow the ship to pieces, even if it detonated in close proximity, because it's not moving any air. But it would do damage. There's no question it would do damage. It would do two primary kinds of damage. It would do radiation damage, would release a lot of heavy neutrons and would irradiate the ship and cause a lot of radiation damage. And it would especially do thermal damage. It would get very, very hot on that side of the ship. You could defeat this again with relatively lightweight armor. I don't think you can come up with I don't think you can afford the weight mass. I'm convinced you can't build a ship that's so armored that it'll take a projectile weapon and survive it. But you can put enough armor against lasers or heat. A mirror surface is not very heavy, and an ablative surface is not very heavy. So both of those can absorb some of that damage. But see, the whole reason I find all of this so interesting, the reason I wanted to do a show on space combat is this, because we're going to start getting to the actual point here. All we know is what we see in the movies, and no one has ever done space combat even close to right, ever. It's never come close. You see spaceships diving and banking like airplanes, or you see them firing off these giant broadsides like on Battlestar Galactica, or you see the Enterprise firing its phasers, and they just, it's not even close to right. And we've got some other questions about why it's not even close to right. So I'll come back to that, and I'll kind of come back and see if I can wrap this up. Not that I'm in any hurry. Let me just see if I got a question, because I want to make sure people get the credit here. So I'll come back and make sure, because I know there was one or two of them that are really just on this same kind of issue. Well, whatever. Oh, here we go. Like Matt Hindelang, I knew there was at least one or two of these, said, of the movies and televisions shows that you've seen that have space combat scenes, which scenes are your favorite? And I got to tell you, Matt, none of them are my favorite. They used to be. I used to like watching. I thought Wrath of Khan battle was great. I thought it was terrific. And the first time you saw those phasers, kind of that pulsing gold phasers coming out of the Enterprise. But think about this for a second, guys. You look at for example, the Wrath of Khan battle, or any of the Star Trek battles. Here's the Enterprise. There's the Reliant. Enterprise is big. Reliant is, what, a quarter that size? How far away are these ships from each other? A mile, maybe? 2? 2 miles? At warps 3 or something, you're moving at 64 times the speed of light or something. These things are a mile away. This is another thing that we probably almost should have led with, and that is this. I am convinced that in space combat, you will not be able to see the enemy with the naked eye, other than conceivably as a point of light. I do not think you will be able to resolve the target. I don't think you will ever see, look, there's the ship. I think you're just going to be sending energy weapons, projectile weapons, missile weapons downrange to a target that is so far away that you simply can't resolve it. It's just maybe you can see it with the naked eye. Spot. So whenever you see these ships just duking it out with each other, they're not even at point blank range, not even at knife fighting range. It's absurd. It's absurd. You never saw, for example, in the last of the great projectile weapon battles in World War II, let's say the Hood versus the Bismarck. If the Hood and the Bismarck, which are early 20th century technology, were shooting at the same range as the Star Trek universe or the Battlestar Galactica universe, these things would be damn near on top of each other. They'd be 6, 7, 8 ship lengths away. The last time that 2 big battleships duked it out in World War II with the Hood and the Bismarck, there may have been one later than that. I don't think there is, though. They were at 20 miles range. 20 miles. I mean, that ship was just barely discernible on the horizon, and that's in an atmosphere and all this other stuff. You're not going to wait till this guy gets close enough. He'll be destroyed by the time he gets close enough to get a good look at him. You'll have killed him, again, in 1900, 1910, 1912, something like that. You start getting Dreadnought-class battleships, you start destroying targets at 10, 15, 20 miles. Certainly 20 miles for things like Iowa and so on. So this whole idea of everything you've ever seen in terms of space combat, big ship here, big ship over there, no. So this is all going to a point. It's going to an artistic point, because that's why I'm here. I'm not an analyst. I just dig the science, because I want to tell you about movies and about what it would look like if you were to apply reason to it, and your best guess. So in space combat, I think there's a couple things you can probably say. Number one, you will never get to see the other ship as a ship. It certainly won't look out the window and have it be there like boom, 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 boom. So there's that. You have different types of weapons that have different effective ranges. And the best way to think of this, I think, again, is to say that that energy weapons have a larger range, do less damage, but they can do less damage further away. Kinetic energy weapons do a lot more damage, fatal damage, but you have to be closer, because once you launch a projectile, all the guy does is maneuver just a little bit and your projectile misses. It takes minutes in many cases to get a projectile down there. So all he has to do is move 4 feet and you miss. So what you get is a really interesting piece of business, and there's 2 other things that are interesting about what I think actual space combat will look like, as opposed to what we see in every single movie or TV show ever. And all of these things are negatives, according to studio executives. And studio executives have IQs of 60. So John Guy says, you've talked about the visuals of Aurora in the past, but what are your ideas regarding audio? There's no sound in space, but if film school has taught me anything, it's that audio is 60% of the image. And John, you're right about that. People do not appreciate just how much of the visual experience is generated by a sound designer. It's absolutely astonishing. It's absolutely astonishing. I'm speaking as an editor now, as a movie editor and a TV editor, and just edited the Arroyo. And you'd put together an action sequence, and you'd lay in a couple of pops and a couple of quick ting ting ting, pop pop pop, ting ting ting. Well, you get a real sound editor in there, and all of a sudden it feels like a gunfight instead of just looking like a gun. It's amazing. And you're right, there is no sound in space. And when I said I want to do this as accurately as we can, we have 2 big things that look and sound different than what you see in movies. And I be as succinct about this as I can be. When you see space combat in movies today or on television today, you see and hear things. And in real space, you don't see or hear anything. which is kind of a disadvantage from a movie point of view at first glance. Because this is the point. This is the whole reason I wanted to talk about this. We're getting into the whole reason I wanted to talk about this is this point I'm about to make right in here. It is absolutely true, in my opinion, that if you were to do an accurate space combat sequence, you would have the problem of launching weapons that were invisible, at least the lasers. It doesn't matter if you're using a visible light laser. Want a white balance. Hey, it doesn't matter because, as we talked about last time, I could take 1,000,000 candle power searchlight and shine it directly in front of your nose from left to right, and as long as that room was absolutely sterile in terms of dust, you'd have no way of knowing that the beam was there. You cannot see light. Light is not visible to the human eye, not unless it's shining directly in your eyes. A 1,000,000 candle power beam of searchlight could go right in front of your nose, and you'd have no way of knowing it was there. The only reason you'd see a beam like that is because the beam hits little particles that are suspended in the air like dust, and that's what shows you the beam, the searchlight beam. So when you see searchlight beams going up to detect bombers in World War II, let's say, what you're seeing is not the light. You're seeing the light reflected off of fog, little particles of water vapor or smoke or dust or whatever. And when we would do laser shows in the planetarium and in nightclubs, the first thing we had to do was fog the room up. Get that god-awful fog juice going. Why are we fogging a room? All I'm doing is I'm putting particles in the air. When I was turning on those damn fogging machines, and God almighty, I don't know if they're any better now, but in the 1980s, those damn things, it took so much maintenance to keep those things clean and so on, and get the fog juice in there, and otherwise their volume would go way down. But when they're really cooking, they've got a liquid that gets super hot. Just put liquid over a hot plate and expand it out through this little atomizer, and it produced very, very fine particles of white fog. And you'd fog up the room, and presumably it's non-toxic. Although if I grow another arm, you'll know where it came from. Because I drank a lot of fog juice, inhaled a lot of it anyway. And so the reason a light show looks so good in a nightclub would be there's so much particulate matter in the air that just that beam going through the fog is awesome. But in space, there's no fog at all. There's no dust. There's no mist. There's no nothing. So a beam in space is invisible. It's invisible. And just think about the phasers coming off the Enterprise, which look so great. They're golden, they're pulsing, just machine guns, and just fabulous, incredibly cool-looking stuff. You won't see the beam. You won't hear the beam. And the beam doesn't travel. When you look at phasers or energy weapons in space combat on Star Wars, when they're on the X-Wing fighters, you dogfight in Star Wars, you see the laser, but the laser actually leaves the barrel of the laser gun, and the beam, even though it's elongated, the beam goes flying through space like a projectile. But it doesn't. The beam lights up, and it just ding, 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 ding. It's like on and on. So imagine like a laser in a planetarium or nightclub, on, off, on, off, on, off. You don't see the beam go traveling through the fog. Beam go around the world 7 times in 1 second. That's how fast that beam is moving. You can't perceive that. It's either all the way on or it's off. On, off, on, off. And you can't see it in space anyway, and you can't hear it. So, wow. Well, we can't have that. So we have to put... You can't do a space combat movie, Bill, and not see the beams. I mean, people won't know what's happening. What? Well, let's just hold on here a second here, Coaches. Let me go directly to John's point about hearing things. There's a scene in 2001: A Space Odyssey where Dave has to get back into the Discovery and Hal's locked him out. And all the time that we've been inside Discovery, we're always hearing sounds. You hear ventilator sounds, you hear machine, little compressors coming on and off, and little servos. And the sound effects of Discovery in 2001, the sound design for the onboard the ship sounds are terrific. Enterprise has always got some kind of sound going. Every time you go down a ship corridor in any science fiction movie ever, the bigger the ship, the deeper the sound is. But the ship is always going. To answer your question here, in 2001: A Space Odyssey, when Dave, he's hyperventilating and he activates the explosive bolts at the back of the pod. Wop up, wop up, wop up. And then, boom, the explosive bolts blow out of the back of the pod, but you are watching from inside the vacuum of the emergency airlock on board Discovery, and there's a sudden explosion, and the astronaut comes hurling out of the debris, bounces off the back wall, and it is utterly silent. And that is terrifying. It's one of the freakiest moments in science fiction, one of the freakiest moments in cinema. When Dave gets blown out of that pod, it's absolutely silent, and that, in my opinion, is much, 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 much more interesting and much more scary on top of it, ever. So, you've got that aspect to it. You've got the... I've been speaking this whole time as kind of an amateur militarist and an amateur physicist. But now I'm speaking to you as a professional storyteller. You will have just about everybody in the world tell you that you have to have sound effects and that you have to have visible beams because that's what the audience expects. But I maintain that the entire essence of entertainment is to give people something that they didn't expect, to give them something shocking, something interesting. The definition of hackneyed and cornied and boring is, yeah, I've seen it before. How many times are we going to watch starfighters go banking and turning and here comes the laser, watch out, watch out. How many times are you going to see this? No. So if you do these things in silence, it's a lot more scary. I'm not 100% sure, I only saw it once, but I don't think they could resist it in gravity. I think in gravity they put subliminal sound effects of these particles hitting things and just couldn't resist it. But I would resist it. And so now the bigger the issue, I think, is beams. So let's just say that I'm going to launch a laser weapon attack against another ship. So my main thing fires. You might conceivably see the turret light up. Conceivably. You could probably get away with that without, still be able to face your ancestors in the halls of your fathers whose mighty deeds you're not worthy to stand before, that kind of thing. But you cannot see that beam traveling through space. You sure as heck don't see the beam travel. But what happens when it lands? This is so interesting. This is why I've said this about 50 times on this show. Writers are lazy, especially technical writers are lazy. They get lazy. Hollywood writers start writing about the military and they get lazy. I'm going to go off on a little rant here. Sorry, this is just going to be the high point of the show as far as I'm concerned. When you get people who don't know fighter pilots, they write fighter pilots like they wrote them in Top Gun. Maverick, if you weren't the best damn pilot in the fleet, I'd have you busted and sent to the brig, permission to buzz the tower. Permission denied. Well, we're going to do it anyway. Yeehaw! Maverick, you made me spill my coffee on myself. I told this story before. I think it needs telling again. That scene in Top Gun where they said permission to buzz the tower, that permission is denied, traffic in the pattern or something. He buzzes the tower anyway. I still have a friend named Steve, who's an air traffic controller in the Air Force for many years, and I asked him right after Top Gun came out. And I said to him, Steve, what would happen if an actual fighter pilot actually did what they did in Top Gun? Asked permission to buzz the tower, which they don't really do much of anyway, frankly. But asked permission to buzz the tower, and permission was denied, and he buzzed the tower anyway. What would happen? And he didn't hesitate for a second. He said if that had actually happened, what would have happened is by the time Maverick pulls his F-14 up and the canopies come up, outside of the jet would be a couple of jeeps full of Marines, or MPs rather, and they would have their M16s leveled at the canopy, and they would say, "Get out of the airplane! Get on the ground now!" That kind of thing, right? These guys would be arrested. They go to the brig. They'd never be seen again. They'd be dishonorably discharged. They'd be drummed out of the military. And even that is a kind of an absurd thing to say because it just wouldn't happen. It's kind of a silly thing to speculate on what would happen if a fighter pilot were to do something that stupid, because fighter pilots aren't that stupid. With one or two notable exceptions, I suppose. They're not that stupid. That's not how they are. And it's laziness. It's laziness on the part of writers to write fighter pilots as buccaneers. Because that's what they write them as. They write them as buccaneers, like pirates. Like, hey, yo-ho, let's get up there and Maverick. No. It's lazy. It's lazy and it's stupid. It's stupid, lazy, dumb people projecting onto these guys what they think is interesting. But my point, this is the point of this entire episode, I'm going to make it 50 times tonight. My point is, reality is harder and it's better. It's more interesting. It's more interesting to portray a fighter pilot as what a fighter pilot is, which is an extremely disciplined professional. Extremely disciplined. Don't get me wrong. If you're going to succeed as a fighter pilot, you have one quality that is your lifeblood, and that is aggression. You have to be aggressive. You have to turn to that enemy and destroy him. You have to get into that fight time and time again, especially in Korea and World War II. You'd hear, in any war, you'd hear in World War I when they first started flying airplanes against other airplanes. These guys would see a flight of 10 or 12 enemy planes. They just, by himself, some of these guys would just go after them. They're so aggressive. But the most successful fighter ace of the First World War was Manfred von Richthofen. And Manfred von Richthofen had some pretty simple rules. He said, number one, if it's a fair fight, you don't want to be in it. Richthofen stalked his prey like a hunter. He came out of the sun. He used the advantages of altitude all the time. And if it looked like he had a chance of getting killed, he wouldn't get in the fight. Richthofen picked off loners. He picked off new pilots. He picked off the wounded. He picked off the damage. He was an executioner. And he was disciplined. And all the great fighter pilots are that way. They're just great. Dave Big Booty says, here comes the Crimson Tide reference, because I've made it 5 times. I'm not going to make it 6 times. But it's true. Crimson Tide had moments in it where it's like, what's going on? Oh, I don't know, but it sounds good to me. So there you go. Dave Wellman here says, does that make so Active Valor was more interesting? Look, getting things technically right doesn't make up for bad writing or bad acting. It just means that if you have good writing and good acting, you are showing people something they've never seen before. And I think fighter pilots are, if you portray them as the way the fighter pilots I know are, which are family guys, they're almost universally family men. You want them to be family men. You want stable, emotionally stable guys who are extremely confident, extremely aggressive, but they're not reckless. And if you don't understand the difference between aggressive and reckless, then you probably shouldn't be writing about military. You should probably be writing about pirates, write about, pirates. I bet you even pirates weren't even like pirates. Of course they weren't. But this is the thing, this Buccaneer thing. So this is what I'm trying to say here, right? This is exactly what I'm trying to say here. The reality is more interesting than the laziness. So if I fire an energy weapon at a ship, what happens on the ship? Well, first of all, I said you can't see the beam in space because there is no beam in space. But if the first time that a weapon lands on a ship and you're looking at the outside of the ship and all of a sudden the outside of the ship just starts to boil red, and pieces of it just start coming off, that's terrifying. And then if the next thing that happens on that ship is they go, holy crap, we've just taken a laser hit, we didn't even know we were detected, countermeasures, and you start putting clouds of dust or smoke or ink or whatever you want to call it out there, now the beam, you don't see the beam coming, but just outside of the ship, just 10 yards, 100 yards, 50 yards, I don't know, a mile or two, it doesn't matter. All of a sudden, boom, a flash of light occurs out there, and some energy still comes through. Doesn't anybody else think that's just interesting? I think it's fascinating. You're sitting along out there, all of a sudden the hull of your ship starts to boil. You're sitting in a completely dark or silent room. You're in a suit because you've depressurized the ship. All of a sudden, the wall against you, just molten metal, just hits that wall. You turn around, look over your shoulder. There's a hole the size of a Volkswagen in the hull. So you got hit by a laser. Oh, well, let's get some countermeasures out there. Next thing you know, you're flying along, and there's this cloud of black stuff out there, and just vaporizes. It just goes white like a lightning bolt comes through it. That's cool. I think it's really cool. And I think one thing I will say about Gravity, which I didn't like very much actually, although visually it was unbelievable. One thing I will say about Gravity was they absolutely got the sense of the velocity, the closure velocity, because when those particles, when the debris came blowing past those guys, it wasn't like, here comes, no. So I say that I'm going to do it, and I'm going to do it as realistically as I can. And this is why we have to make our own movies, guys. This is why we have BillWhittle.com and membership and all this other stuff, because we cannot hand this over to the people who sit in the Black Tower down there at Universal City and who are 27 years old and who get paid $250,000 a year to be creative consultants and who don't know anything about anything, and the kind of people who would sit there and go, you know what, make the space combat scene a little more really kind of cool for the audience? Oh, no, what's that? A talking dog. Wouldn't they have talking dogs in the future? Why not have one of the pilots of the ship be like a talking dog, a super intelligent dog? Wouldn't that be cool? Yeah, great idea, Jen. That's fantastic. Let's just go with that. No, we're not going to do talking dogs. No, we're not. No, we're going to do it right. And if we have to do it right for less money, okay. The world is changing, and special effects are cheap, and so are computers, and so are cameras, and all this other stuff. So, no, we're not going to do the talking dog. We're not going to say, well, audiences won't understand if. How do you know that? And besides, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if they don't understand. It doesn't matter if they don't understand why they can't see the beam. What will matter is they will be surrounded by an experience where they go, holy crap, what the hell is going on? And when people go, what is going on? That's a memorable movie. So there you go. So I think just going to review the questions here because some of these have something else to do with things. Really, at this point, I'm just going to tell you what I'm sketch the outlines of the second Aurora movie. The first movie is about a mission to Jupiter. Second movie is about a war with China in space, a space war. It's a war in space. That's why it's called a space war. It happens in space, and it's a war. I'll tell you how I'm going to handle the space combat in the second Aurora movie, which is called Ice Station Series. I don't want to give too much of the plot away, but basically our guys is 3 or 4 years after the first movie, and they've set up a water station on Ceres. They're taking ice from Ceres, which probably has more fresh water than the Great Lakes. Europa, by the way, almost certainly has more fresh water than planet Earth does. So water's awesome because if you have water, you have water to drink, which is nice. You have water, which is a decent reaction mass. You have water, which can be cracked into hydrogen, which is a great fuel, and oxygen, which is fun to breathe. So water's good, and it's good that there's water out there. So at the beginning of the story, you've got a base on Ceres, and they're just basically cracking water. They're just melting the water, and they're putting it into hydrogen form, and they're putting it into oxygen form, and they're basically, since Ceres has a microgravity, it's probably like a thousandth of a G or something on the surface. They just push it out into space, and now you've got fuel. Awesome. You got fuel and oxygen. Great. So that's what they're doing. And all of a sudden, this base goes dark. Fortunately, this is a copyrighted script, so I don't have to worry so much about that. The base goes dark. The telemetry of the base just gone. We're not getting anything from the Ceres base. Really, what happened? I don't know. We lose a signal? Yeah, we lost a signal. Carrier wave? No, carrier wave's gone. What happened? We don't know. So they start doing the deconstruction of the last signal they got, and they're able to break the video down and get all the video feeds down. See, these little details that are cool. This is what happens when you get a guy who knows what he's talking about. And what looked like just loss of signal, they're able, because they're getting video feeds from 6 or 7 or 10 different videos at any given time. And what they're able to do is they're able to see that these videos actually went out in sequence in the space of about half a second, maybe a little bit more, maybe a second to half a second. It's like camera off, like it's like something walked towards them. And from the last cameras, just in the back of the frame, they start to see like puffs, just dust coming up. And they realize, okay, these sensors and signals and cameras, all this telemetry has actually been walked off. It's like a creeping barrage, like what's the word? It's not a box barrage. It's kind of thing they would do in World War I, where they would basically just start putting rounds down and they'd start walking the rounds forward. And creeping barrage is what they called it, I think. So these sensors have gone off, and then they start looking closely at the telemetry, and they realize that no, they've gone off in sequence. They didn't just go out. They've been destroyed, and there's just a little trace of visual evidence saying that impacts are happening. And the first thing somebody says is meteor storm, and everybody looks at him like, what? No. What, meteor storm? No. What happened? Well, we come to find out that China had claimed to have lost a probe 2 years ago, and that when they backtracked the orbit, turns out it could have been that. And it turns out that it was basically a kinetic weapon. Somebody basically put a shotgun blast of 200 BBs, ball bearings the size of a regular ball bearing, 200 of those in a canister, and launched it at this base and detonated it up a couple miles out. And these things, just like a giant shotgun blast, just walked took the whole damn thing out. That's an attack. That's a war. Of course, there's plausible deniability. Nobody saw the vessel. Nobody saw anything. It was just a dead probe, but they do their research and they find out where could it have come from. It could have been this probe which went missing a year ago or whatever. Turns out, yeah, this orbits could have worked. Maybe not could have worked. But they know it wasn't an accident. They know it's not a natural event. Somebody basically fired a giant shotgun at their base and killed their people, killed them all. Not all of them. Some of them were at a remote station. So these guys come back to the main station, and the question is, can they get supplies to these guys in time? And they try, and they miss by about a day or two. You get kind of that god-awful, horrible, horrible, poignant thing at Robert Falcon Scott at the South Pole, where they try to get the relief mission to him, and they open the tent, and they see the 3 guys sleeping there, and they think, oh, yeah, they've been dead for a week or something like that. So now we're stuck with an interesting situation, and this does go directly to one of these questions here from Jennifer Lowry, who says, is there room in the private sector in the space combat arena, or do developments need to come through the government? There's an actual line that I just love. It's maybe the first line I came up with in this movie, where the director, the administrator of the actual program for the Americans, private space program, is a character named Sam Grafe, and he's got his chief engineer named Frank Reinhardt. These 2 guys are very close. And Grafe is told, because he's not an engineer, he's told, no, this was an attack. And Grafe just basically says, the rest of the high-level staff say to him, what are we going to do? And he says, well, what do you think we're going to do? These sons of bitches destroyed our base. We're at war. We're going to attack them. We're going to get them back. And Reinhardt says, Sam, there's 200 of us. You can't go to war with China, Sam. There's 200 of us. There's 1 billion of them. And Grafe says, yeah, there's 1 billion of them, but how many of them are up there? How many of them are up there? Because we can put 30 guys up there, and they can put 30 guys up there, and I think our 30 guys are better than their 30 guys. I think the 30 guys we have in this 200 are better than the 30 guys they can get out of 1 billion. I'll be damned if I'm going to sit there and roll over for this, because if we take it, it's over. So, basically, the second act of this thing is the construction of, is basically cannibalizing what is normally supposed to be a pretty much an Aurora 2. It's the second one, Andromeda or something like that, I guess. And they strip it down. They just strip it down, and they have to start improvising the weapons, because what they find is that the Chinese are doing to them what they did in the first movie, which is building something more or less under people's noses, but in secret. Nobody really guesses what it is. Turns out that China has assembled out at L5 or something a space vehicle, a weapon, a battleship. And now we get into all the stuff that I've laid this groundwork for, so I can tell you basically what I want to do just sort of artistically here. I want the Chinese to have developed a space, I hate to say a battleship, but it's a war-fighting vehicle, space vehicle. And the Chinese weapon is a laser. It's a big laser. And they have some intelligence on how big the laser is, how powerful the laser is. But the Chinese weapon is a laser. And so the Chinese strategy is to stay out of close range. The strategy for the Chinese is to stay at long range and use the energy weapon at long range and just keep poking holes in whatever's coming at them. And so by the time it gets into effective range, it's destroyed. Now, the energy weapon has an interesting problem. If you've got a big honking laser, how do you get rid of the heat? It takes a lot of heat, a lot of energy to drive that laser beam. And if you want to cycle this thing, you generate a lot of waste heat. And you can't, we talked about in this beginning, it's a vacuum. You can't just put a ventilator out there or a radiator. Radiators in Earth, a radiator on your car, for example, you got the engine heat from your car that's being generated by the chemical reaction of the gas exploding in the cylinders. That heat is carried out through the water and out through the oil into the radiator, and the radiator gets rid of the engine heat into the atmosphere. It's the air going through the radiator that takes the heat away. There's no air in space. So if you've got an energy weapon and you're generating a lot of heat to make that energy weapon work, what do? Well, it turns out that they've got an image of this Chinese ship, and they think, my God, that's a gigantic fuel tank in the middle. It says an awful lot of fuel for this thing. It's not just fuel. The Chinese ship is carrying water. And And it's using the water as a reaction mass, and it's using the water to crack for fuel. But what it's really using this giant fat tub of water for is it's using the water as a heat sink. And the water is absorbing enough of the energy so they can keep firing this laser. And our guys are not expecting this. This is drama. It's like the energy weapon is a lot more powerful than they thought it was going to be. And it's firing much, much, much more rapidly than they ever calculated that they could ever dump that kind of waste heat. Because you can do these kind of equations. I can't because I'm an idiot, but you can do these kind of equations on a piece of paper. How much energy will we deliver to a target with a laser using current technology? And if we deliver this much energy, how much waste heat do we have to get rid of? These are very simple things for our guys to figure out. So we figure, well, they've got let's just say off the top of my head, I'll get somebody who knows the research a little better. Let's say they've got a 200 megawatt laser, and let's just say that they think that this thing will deliver 200 megawatts at 10,000 miles, and that they can fire it once every 3 minutes. And it turns out it delivers a gigawatt at 30,000 miles, and they can fire it every 10 seconds. Now our guys are in real trouble because this Chinese weapon's a lot more powerful than they thought they would be. Now our guys, on the other hand, have to work very quickly because they've just been attacked. They got to get in this fight. They got to get out there before the Chinese have more resources than we do in terms of budget. They've got billions and billions and billions of dollars. We just got hundreds of millions and smart people. So they strip this thing out there and they get it out there. So here's where the whole thing kind of comes together. And the whole denouement of the last hour and 38 minutes of talking here is this. Because we have to move quickly and cheaply and we have to build something simple and fast, the Americans have to go with a particle weapon. They're just basically going to take a rail gun. And this rail gun is going to shoot a slug that looks like a hockey puck, or a bunch of them, and we're just going to try and smack those guys. So now you've got the classic conflict between... Is that a phone? Undoubtedly one of our subscribers calling to complain about something. I have no idea where that sound's coming from. I guess it's coming from the back room. Anyway, here's the point. So now you've got now to make these things clear, you've got the Chinese who've gone down the energy weapon path, and they've got a long-range weapon that is deadly but not as lethal. The Americans have a short-range weapon that is extremely lethal but has to be close to work, because if you start firing hockey pucks at guys, all they have to do is just move 20 feet out of the way. The hockey puck takes 2-3 minutes to get to target, and you're half a mile, 2, 3 miles out of the way. So now what? Now we get down to the final thing that I think is fascinating in all this. You have the different weapons, you have the different defenses and so on. They've got a weapon that's long range and hurts. We've got a weapon that's short range and kills. So you can probably think about this as two boxers, right? This is kind of the thing that's I think the best analogy that I'm able to come up with. On one hand, you've got a guy who's a boxer, and he's got reach. He's got 2-3 inch reach on his opponent, and he's got a lot of speed. He's got a lot of hand speed, but he doesn't have a lot of power. And he's fighting a guy who's much smaller, much shorter, is much shorter reach, and he just can't reach the guy, but he has an extremely powerful punch. So here's the classic battle, right? The Chinese are trying to be the boxer with the jab. They want to jab. They want to stay out of range. They want to jab. They want to hit him again and again and again and again and again with these relatively weak weapons, but just keep hitting him and don't let him ever hit you, and just knock him down, degrade him. The Americans have the exact opposite problem. They cannot afford to stand out there and start taking pot shots at each other, because they're going to lose, because the effective range of the Chinese is several times their effective range. So the American strategy is, we got to just take our beating and get in close. And if we can get in close, then we will. If we hit him, we'll kill him. If we hit him once, we're going to knock him out. But we got to get inside his defenses. And then there's a bunch of little twists and reveals and cool stuff that I'm not going to give you now because I'm not an idiot. But the fact of the matter is, there's your battle. And so what it really, really, really comes down to, in my opinion, in space combat, what it really, really comes down to is this. It's delta V. It's the ability to control the engagement range. That's the variable, I think. I think that's the variable. I think it comes down to delta V. So if you've got a more agile ship which means you can accelerate and decelerate more quickly, and you have more available fuel to apply to this problem because you can only maneuver it as much as you have fuel for. Then what you really need if you're going to be the short-range fighter is you have to be able to control the range. If the Chinese control the range, the fight is over before it begins, because if they've got more delta V, you just don't ever get close enough. They just stay out there and just keep hitting you, and you try to get closer, they just get out of your way. You have to be able to be outmaneuvering them so that you can get inside their defenses. So, by the way, this way I've set this up is counterintuitive to my emotional comfort level, which is good, because my emotional comfort level would be for the Americans to have the much more sophisticated, much bigger, much more powerful, much more sophisticated ship, but we don't. They've been working on this for 20 years. Our guys had to scratch this thing together in 20 weeks or less. I think that's cool. I like being off our comfort zone. And by a weird coincidence, I don't know if this was subliminal on me or not, but when I was a little boy, I didn't get, my dad was a hotel manager, didn't get to see too much of him. One day we all went downtown to get ice cream or something, and we were in our pajamas. We drove a 20-minute, 30-minute drive from where we lived to get into Hamilton. And we got in downtown, and we were in our pajamas, and Dad was going to get some ice cream. And we were going past one of the two theaters that were in downtown Bermuda at the time, and there was a poster for a movie in one of these theaters called Battle Beneath the Earth. And I about leapt out of the car. I thought it looked so cool, because it looked like they were laser tanks underneath the Earth. And sure enough, you can go rent this movie. I took a look at it when I was an adult, and I'm convinced they remade the movie and made it much, much worse, because when I saw it when I was a kid, it was awesome. But it was pretty much the same story in a weird way, because Battle Beneath the Earth was a story about the Chinese who've been working for years and years and years and years and years. They built these under-the-ocean tunnels, and they had laser tanks that were cutting these tunnels out of the Earth. And at the last minute, the U.S. has to kind of put up a counter weapon. It's kind of cool. Battle Beneath the Earth. Anyway, so you've got this whole thing going on, and then, as I say, you got a nice denouement. You got a lot of great reverses. You got a great reveals. You got those, it's kind of those things where it's like, just when things look bad, all of a sudden things look good. Just when things look good, things start to suddenly look bad. All these great reversals and stuff. But I do like the idea very much that this guy basically says, Sam, there's 300 of us. You can't go to war with China. Why not? How many of them can they get up there? And it's true. And what it really ends up doing, because the first movie is about private people putting their own money against government regulators that are trying to shut them down. They're literally running to keep themselves out of jail. And by the time we get to the second one, what we find out is that really, I don't ever say it. I don't think I ever have to say it. By the time we get to the second one, we find out that this aerospace company, these 300 people, they are America. Because America, the country, is not backing them. Our government's not backing our guys. Our government's just saying, we never liked you in the first place. We told you shouldn't be out there. So you've got this little group of engineers and test pilots and physicists, and it's multinational to the degree that they're the best people from around the world want to come and work here. Japanese guy is an arrival in the second movie, and he loses a daughter out there on that series base. And I like the idea that this little company is America. It's like, this is it. These are the problem solvers, and they're the engineers, and they're the warriors, and they're the ones with the spirit, and they're the ones that don't roll over. And it's not a diplomatic incident to them. They've lost their sons and their moms and their brothers and their sisters, and they've lost their people, and they're not going to still sit still for it. They're going to go and get them. And I think it's cool. I really think it's cool. But anyway, that was basically the space warfare thing. I'm just going to take a quick look here at the questions, make sure I didn't miss anything. Really was just leaving out for me that I wouldn't really want to say. Oh, by the way, George A. Friedland pretty much guessed the whole thing. He said, scenario, the communists have their eyes on your asteroid mines. Is this likely theater of operations in the first Space Marines? It's exactly what happens. The communists have their eyes on our space mines, our water mines. Walter Amita said, space combat. Oh, God, I don't want to forget this. Can somebody remind me not to forget the Interstellar trailer that Walter Amita showed me? I'll tee this up for you. They put a new trailer up for this movie, which looks really cool. He says, space combat, never sent a human to do a robot's job. Who knows? Maybe the whole thing will be completely automated. AI could just do it. There's certainly so many cases to make for unmanned vehicles, unmanned weapon systems. Certainly things like drones and decoys and missiles, smart missiles, that sort of thing. It's all cool, and we'll work all that in there. But honestly, if you don't have people on board the vehicles, then it may be what really would happen, but it's not a story worth telling. Our buddy Max Wild, Stalwart, says, one space opera trope I often see employed is the use of force fields or shields. What are these things, and are they at all feasible? I'm not aware of even theoretically the ability to put up something that stops energy and particles. You can produce an electromagnetic field that will deflect magnetized objects. If you're shooting a particle beam, a charged particle beam at somebody, if you're shooting protons at somebody, you can deflect that with magnetic fields, certainly. Magnetic fields can deflect a certain amount of these heavy atomic particles from particle weapons. You could, as you get more sophisticated, and I'm kind of thinking this on the fly because it just kind of came to me. We were talking about sending out these sand canisters, this glitter canisters, in along the axis of a particle. I'm sorry, of a beamed weapon attack. The problem is, you put it out there, it forms a little ink cloud that you're hiding behind, and that's great. But over time, you and the ink cloud will start to drift, and if you decide to maneuver, then you leave the ink cloud behind. I suppose it might be possible to take a magnetic field and embed it in another magnetic field and pump something shiny between the two and put a reflective bubble, blow a reflective bubble out in front of the ship, or just keep it out in front of the ship. That doesn't seem to be impossible. You got a magnetic field, and then you got glittery stuff, and you got another magnetic field, and you got a shiny bubble. But the magnetic fields are not deflecting things. All you really got is you've got a bunch of little particles, or maybe it's just mercury or some liquid or something. So you're really just putting a round mirror around you. It's kind of cool. But it's not a force field in the way that we understand a force field. I don't think the force fields, the awesome Lost in Space force field, which never worked. All the Lost. I just realized this now. I don't think it has ever occurred to me before. They got that force field generator in Lost in Space outside the Jupiter 2, and it's not a force field. It's just a giant burglar alarm. Because it never kept anything out. All it did was spark when somebody came through it. So it's like, somebody's at the front door. Has the force field protected us? No, but it's caused a lot of sparks, so we know there's somebody out there. This is an interesting question from our friend Cindy Lucin. Cindy Lucin says, if our world was actually confronted by hostile aliens that were able to attack us in multiple unfamiliar dimensions, how would we best meet this challenge? We would best meet this challenge, Cindy, by getting on our knees and begging for our lives and surrendering instantly and just offering to toil in their underground sugar caves. If somebody's moving in different dimensions, this is like a person fighting an ant, one ant. It's just out of the question. And it's an interesting question too, because frankly, when the kind of combat I'm talking about is combat between humans, and humans have more or less the same tech level. The Chinese and we have more or less the same tech level. We spend a decade developing a technology, a decade and billions of dollars, and they steal it through spying, and now they've got it. So they lag behind us, but they lag behind us a little bit. Great example of this was the Russians, right? We spent insane amount of money and years, 3-4 years on the Manhattan Project. I mean, 1/6 of all of the electricity generated in the United States during World War II was generated in Tennessee to run those uranium centrifuges to get the weapons-grade uranium. And it was an enormous, colossal, massive project. Enormous. We can't appreciate the scale of it. So we had our first bomb in 1945, and the Russians had their first bomb, I want to say 48 or 49, because they stole it. They just spied it. We developed it, and they spied it. We developed the Nautilus, which was the first nuclear-powered submarine. The Soviets got the basics of what we were doing, knew it could be done, had an approximate idea of how we were doing it, and then they kind of reverse-engineered it and made their first nuclear submarine, which killed its entire crew and irradiated them, and I think it killed the second crew as well. And our first nuclear submarine, the Nautilus, is sitting in a place of glory, I think in Groton, Connecticut. Absolutely immaculate, looks as beautifully maintained as it did the day it came off the ways. and the first Soviet nuclear submarine is rusting away in a harbor someplace in Vladivostok or something. It's turning into iron oxide. That's the difference between us and them. We developed the B-29. We talked about the atomic bomb and all the work that went into that. But of equal, maybe not of equal complexity, but certainly a challenge of damn near the same scale was the weapon to deliver it. So we not only, the delivery system, which was the B-29. The B-29 was an order of magnitude more advanced than anything else in the war as bombers go. So we spent all this time, effort, and money, technological skill, bleeding edge American technology, best in the world, although the Nazis were amazing in this regard. But the B-29 is a great example of an amazing bomber. Amazing. And 3 of them at the end of the war were flown into Russia. I don't think they crash landed. I think they ran out of fuel and landed at Russian bases. Let's not forget that the Soviets were our allies during the whole World War. And they got a hold of 3 B-29s, and the Russians literally took them apart bolt by bolt, panel by panel. And the skin of an airplane, it consists of little pieces of aluminum that are riveted together and curved in a certain shape. And so they'd take one of these things off and they'd send it to a shop, and they'd manufacture exactly that same thing with exactly the same rivets. And basically, they took the plane apart and made all the pieces, made 100 of them, put them back together. Now they have 100 B-29s. Stalin said he wanted it reproduced absolutely accurately, not to let anything be different. And it turns out that this is a story, I hope it's not apocryphal, I'm pretty sure it's true, that the Soviet engineers who were living in such terror of Stalin and the purges and so on, when they said Comrade Stalin wants it exactly the same, they made it exactly the same so that the foot pedals on the Russian B-29 said Boeing on them. Anyway, so tech level here in the world is always pretty close. The Confederates come up with an ironclad, and at the same time, what's his name? Wasn't Dahlgren. Ericsson, I want to say, the Swede who invented the monitor. The Navy said, yeah, we like your idea, but we don't want to risk it. So he paid his own money, paid for the monitor out of his own pocket, and had to show that it would work before the Navy reimbursed him. But so you've got the Confederates and you got the Union, and both of them are working on ironclads. They fought to a dead stop. They're just a stalemate because the tech levels were essentially the same. Cannons, I think they might have been rifled. They certainly were rifled. Almost certainly they were rifled on the Monitor. I don't know if they were on the Virginia or not. But close enough, right? So here's the point I'm trying to make for you here. Cindy? Sorry. I forgot who I asked the question. Cindy, yes, sorry. Cindy Lou. Here's the point I'm trying to make. When the tech level is more or less the same, like us versus the Germans, us versus the Japanese had aircraft carriers, we had aircraft carriers. They had propeller-driven airplanes, we had propeller-driven airplanes. You got to fight there. How many can we get out there? Well, is the Corsair a better fighter than the Zero? Well, here and there on some areas, but this is the point I'm trying to make. If you were to take a very, very, very small period of time difference in human history, let's say 50 years, and I were to say to you, the United States Navy of 1985 is going to fight the German Navy of 1915. That's 70 years, right? That is a pretty small difference in technological level. You still got submarines, you still got surface ships, you still have airplanes. The Germans have airplanes, the Germans have submarines, the Germans have battleships, and we have airplanes, and we have submarines, and we have battleships. That war, let's take the Royal Navy, better example, because the Royal Navy was more powerful than the German Navy. The Royal Navy of 1916 versus the United States Navy of 1985, that fight lasts 2 days. We take 0 losses, the entire Royal Navy is sunk. That's how that would come out. And I'm not exaggerating, and we all know I'm not exaggerating. You take the most powerful Navy in the world, hundreds of ships of the Royal Navy, battleships, with airplanes and submarines, against the U.S. Navy in 1985, and we not only don't lose a ship, we don't lose a person. Nobody gets killed in our team at all, and the entire British Navy is at the bottom of the ocean. Because even that small difference in technological level is overwhelming. It's overwhelming. Nuclear sub is stay underwater forever. Nuclear sub probably do 25, 30, 35 knots underwater. British submarine at 1915 might do 3-4 knots underwater. We can detect them hundreds of miles away. They can't detect us if we're around the corner. It's as Overload Ed said, it's like Final Countdown. It was a great movie I mean, not a great movie. It's not even a really good movie. It's just an interesting idea where the Nimitz goes back in time and has the ability to try and prevent Pearl Harbor. So you've got, it was kind of the Final Countdown was actually kind of the world's ultimate revenge film. And by the way, it's an interesting little sidelight here because Final Countdown came out more or less the same time as Rambo, and the military was at a really low point there in the Carter years, after Vietnam and before Reagan really started to build it back up again. The morale was very low. I had a friend who was, I told you about earlier, was air traffic controller, very low. And culturally, you start to see these revenge movies. So Rambo is we go back and win the Vietnam War, and Final Countdown is we go back and stop Pearl Harbor because we're using F-14 Tomcats up against Japanese Zeros. And it's just visually, it's just really cool. There's a couple of shots where you get this couple of waves of Japanese fighter bombers coming in on their propellers, and we know what's going to happen. They're going to just sink our entire fleet. Next thing you know, these two F-14s just roll in on these guys, and it's like, yeah. But the point is, Cindy, forget about other dimensions. If these people are even remotely more advanced than us, it's time to call the fight off. And the chance of two civilizations being the same tech level meeting at the same time is essentially zero. Unless there is some asymptotic thing where you can get to a certain level of development and beyond which you just, it's like an upper tech level limit that people could get to, and, you don't ever get interstellar travel, you don't ever get faster than light travel. You have to get interstellar travel, you don't ever get faster than light travel, you don't ever get transport, whatever. But any significant tech level, if you have the tech level advantage, they should just give up, and if you have that kind of a tech level disadvantage, you should just surrender. What else we got here? Joshua Tiemans, can't have a show without a Tiemans question, says, where do you think military forces will choose to fight? Out in open space or near planets or other large celestial bodies that provide cover and tactical possibilities? This is the same kind of question we face in the world today, and that is that why do you need a navy? Because nobody owns the ocean and nobody wants to own the ocean. You can't build anything on the ocean. You can't really harvest the ocean. Navies are there to protect commercial shipping, and they're there to interdict enemy commercial shipping, and they're there to deliver fighting forces to ground targets, countries, soil that are useful, and to prevent enemy navies from delivering them to your soil, which is useful. So when you think about the giant World War II battle out in the Pacific, it was a battle of the Pacific, and it took place in the Pacific. But nobody gave a damn about the Pacific. Nobody was trying to control cubic miles of water for the water. The reason there was a battle in the Pacific was because we wanted to get our goods from point A to point B, and we wanted to get our soldiers onto their territory. And they wanted to get their goods from point A to point B, and they wanted to get their soldiers on our territory. And that's why the battle took place at sea. So I think, Joshua, you end up with the same kind of situation here. You have battles in deep space. When I say deep space, I'm assuming all this takes place in our solar system. I'm not going into interstellar at all. You have the ability to interdict enemy commercial or military vessels between orbits of planets. But the reason you do that is because you want to be able to control access to the stuff that's valuable. Needless to say, there is one glittering prize in the solar system beyond which everything, it doesn't just pale in comparison. I mean, it's the prize and assorted dust. And that's Earth orbit, because that's where everything is. It's where everything that matters, everything that's worth a damn is in Earth orbit. But that doesn't mean it's the only useful place. It just means it's so much more valuable than anything else. I can see a world, frankly, in fact, I think I'm almost going to have to predicate this, where you could say space combat is space combat and war in space is war in space, but it has to take place beyond low Earth orbit, or else everybody teams up on you down on the ground, that kind of thing. That's actually kind of a great little thing. So, you guys want to duke it out there at, in orbit around Vesta? Who cares? But you bring this fight to Earth, then we're going to invade your actual countries. So, Josh, I think it's the same thing. You have a deep space fight because you want to stop a ship or defend a ship from getting from point A to point B. You want to escort your ground troops in or whatever. Ceres, as I mentioned, is a valuable piece of real estate. It's the largest asteroid, several hundred miles across, and it's got more fresh water on it than the Great Lakes. That's useful to control that. Now, of course, you don't have to just because you have one colony on or one station on Ceres doesn't mean that other people can't have bases on Ceres. The Chinese destroyed our base in my movie because they didn't want us to have the fuel. It's not like there wasn't room for them to get fuel. They get all the fuel they damn well want. They just didn't want us to have it. They're getting a little aggressive out there, I've noticed. So there you go. And actually, Joe Palladino had pretty much the same question. Wars are usually fought over gaining territory because the population is threatened by the military of an opposing society. So if 99.9999% of humans reside on the Earth, along with our country's borders, what will be the point of taking the battle into space other than it being badass, of course? Well, speaking as a storyteller, as a movie maker, it being badass is the main reason you want to do it. But if you're going to go out to space, you know, there are... Space is filled with islands, and this is another whole discussion, which we're not going to do tonight. But one of my pet peeves, and it's only relatively late in life, is that nobody has an appreciation for how empty the solar system is. Because whenever you see a diagram of the solar system, you see the sun, and here's Mercury, and here's Venus, and here's Earth, and here's Mars. Jupiter's a little bigger, Saturn, and so on. Neptune. And you see them. But if you were to reduce this to actual scale so that the sun was visible, Mercury would be a speck of dust, invisible to the naked eye, you know, across the room. Venus would be in the parking lot, and Earth would be, you know, it's so empty. It's so empty. AstroNerd 1 points out that the asteroid Amun, which I guess is named after an Egyptian god, somebody must have done a little work on Amun. He says it contains 600 billion tons, I'm going to guess. Or maybe that's, 6,000 billion worth of iron, cobalt, and gold. I don't know whether it's $6,000 billion or 6,000 billion tons. Might be dollars. But asteroids there's metal out there. There's useful metal. And as we know from meteorites, there are two different kinds of meteorites. There's a carbonaceous chondrites, I want to say, and metallic. So some asteroids and meteors are just pretty much pure iron, and awesome, cool iron too. And other ones are just stones. There's a lot of iron out there. Lots. Even though space is very thin, and even though you could sail right through the heart of the asteroid belt, back and forth for the rest of your life, make hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of trips through the asteroid belt, and never see an asteroid even as a point of light. Never see one. Not one. There's nothing out there. It's so big. It's tumbling boulder nonsense. No. And even in 2001, they cheated. You say like, Discovery's like a little thing out there. Here comes a space rock. Nah. No. It's so scarce out there. So there are resources out there, Joe. Let's see here. Justin Cheerhart says, what will the targeting systems be like for space combat? I don't know, Justin, but as we talked earlier, you got that pie slice problem of having to aim something at a 10,000th of a degree or less. I don't know how you do that. I suspect you don't do it mechanically. My guess would be you'd have to do it electronically. You just have to steer a beam somehow. I don't know. I don't think you get that kind of precision out of gears. In fact, I'm sure you can't. You'd have to have some sort of electromagnetic mount or something that would be able to extremely precisely position that thing and buffer it against, even somebody walking, or something moving on the ship is causing that kind of vibration. You miss by 30 miles. I like this question because it's fun. Chris Taylor asks, would any of your crewmen carry a 1911 or other handgun? You never know. There was one case of a USAF fighter pilot having to open the cockpit and shoot holes in his wingtip tank with his pistol to drain it so that he didn't have to eject out of an otherwise good jet. That's an amazing story. Plus, I imagine it would be very handy in case of space madness, and I wish I'd had time to get Ren. If you've never seen Space Madness with Ren and Stimpy, it's about the funniest thing I've ever seen. Or, something mundane like re-entry over China. So would you carry a pistol? The reason I like that story is because gravity is well overrated in space. Most of space is going to be 0G. You might have a spin habitat or something. But the fun thing about a pistol in space is not only that you don't particularly want to be shooting projectile weapons inside of a pressurized cylinder, but the recoil. The reason I would have a 1911 with me strapped onto the side of my spacesuit if I'm outside of a spaceship is because if my maneuvering jets go down, I could probably use the pistol to fly myself back to the ship. There was a thought experiment thing back when I was in high school. It was the kind of thing where it's like you're on the moon or you're in space and you're given matches, a candle, a gun, just weird stuff. And you have to go do this to get there. I forget if anybody can remind me where that was or if they ever had that kind of thing. It was really cool. And it turned out like the gun was useful because the gun could actually, you want to go that way, you fire the gun that way, back you go. It's the recoil. So, I don't think you want to have a projectile thrower in 0G because of recoil. If you had a little pistol that was launching rocket rounds, then you don't have recoil. Recoilless rocket is, recoilless rifle. It's called a recoilless rifle because rockets don't generate recoil. They're not being ejected out of a pressurized cylinder that's being pushed back against. They're just firing against the inside of their internal rocket cylinder, so they don't recoil at all. Okay, we're getting towards the end here. Max Wild back again says, the Death Star. The Death Star looks like a fantastic piece of engineering, literally. Would you like to have one? I'd like to have several. I don't see any reason why I should limit myself to one Death Star. Frankly, if I have the ability to have a Death Star, I'd like to have a Death Star, a backup Death Star, a long-range Death Star, and maybe a couple of Death Stars I could loan to my friends. Matt Hindenlang asks, I already think I took that one, space combat scenes, my favorite ones. I don't have one. Here's one that's really interesting. I probably already started this war just with this episode. And it comes from a person whose screen name is Chinese, appears to be Chinese character. So I can't pronounce it. I don't even know how to pronounce it. But it's an interesting question. And it says, space combat will be silent. It will be invisible. Why use visible length lasers at all when ultraviolet or higher energy lasers would be superior? Combat will happen at distances too vast and speeds too high for humans, so it will all be done by computer. Well, there's no question about computers. That doesn't necessarily mean unmanned, but it will absolutely have to be controlled by computers. In an open space fight where there's no ambush save from within a meteor field, I can disagree with you here about meteor fields. There are no such things as meteor fields, but you could have somebody buried beneath an asteroid or something like that, so no ambush. Those with both the long-range sensors and the longest-range weapons will always win. They will always win if they can control the range. In other words, if you've got long-range separate sensors and long-range weapons, and the other guy has short-range weapons that are more lethal and he has some survivability, if he can get into short range, then you lose. So you don't automatically win with long-range weapons. You do automatically win with long-range weapons if you have the ability to control the range through maneuverability. That I would agree with. Would there really be much space combat at all? Why take the risk of death in the most horrible ways if you already know what the outcome must be? Will it all become a pure propaganda war for each side to convince the other that they had longer-range sensors and weapons? Will space combat become the ultimate expression of Sun Tzu's art of war, where the battles will be won and lost without anybody firing a single shot? It's a profound question, and my answer would be very certainly no. You are going to fight. If you want to take a look at who has the military superiority between us and Iran, it's not even up for discussion. They're going to fight. Because it's not just about who can win a battle, it's about how you lose a battle, it's about what the alternatives is, about the political issues. The Palestinians are winning the war in Gaza because they're losing the war in Gaza. The Palestinians are launching rocket attacks on Israel, and they're basing their headquarters in hospitals so that Israel is given a choice. Look, if you and I are in a gunfight and we're at 30 paces, and you're hiding behind a child, and I'm not, you've got a real good chance to win this gunfight, because if you shoot me, I'm dead. That's what Hamas is doing when they keep attacking Israel, just trying to kill Israelis. And if I shoot back at you and kill the kid, I lose the publicity war. I lose. So there's a argument to be made for asymmetrical warfare that the Palestinians are doing. It's just an argument that ends you in hell. It's just the argument of savagery and bestiality. It's the argument of the death cult. If you are strapping bombs to your children to defeat an enemy, that culture needs to be eliminated. That culture is sick, and I'm sorry, you don't get my sympathy for this. You don't. The reason you fight wars is to defend women and children. You don't use them as weapons. You don't use them as shields. It's my morality. Maybe it's not yours. Obviously not yours. But we have a difference of opinion on this one, and it's a significant one, and people like me are more than ready to kill you over this particular issue. We'll kill you over the issue of whether or not children should be used as shields in war. That's two different ways to fight a war. I understand that that's how they choose to fight it because they're claiming those are the cards they're dealt. But since we're off on this little galloping little diversion, does anybody ever ask why it is that Israel has tanks and the Palestinians have rocks? Anybody ever ask that fundamental question? You see a Palestinian throwing a rock at a tank. Anybody ever ask the question why the Israelis have tanks and why the Palestinians have rocks? Because the Israelis are forward-looking people. The Palestinians are holding the keys to the houses they were presumably evicted from, which again is a pretty thin case. But the Israelis were evicted from houses all across the world, and most of them were evicted to cattle cars that took them to death camps. They didn't sit there and dangle the keys of their houses back in Hamburg and Berlin and Vienna. They got on with their lives and created a country that builds tanks, some of the best tanks in the world. Maybe the best tank in the world, Merkava tank, is it? It's a damn good tank. They build a defense system that shoots down incoming rockets and mortars because they're looking forward, not backwards. Sorry, just get a little teed off about that sometimes. Matt Drudridge asks, regardless of the realities of its feasibility, my favorite space combat weapon, the BFG 9000, is pretty cool for infantry. The ability to just open a room full of monsters, pull the trigger once, and have everything just go dead is bloody neat. I was talking earlier about nuclear weapons in space and how essentially they're not useless. They generate radiation. They generate a good thermal damage, but it's over a short range because that thermal, even the heat of the nuclear weapon dissipates pretty fast because of the inverse square law. And I wish I'd had time to do it. I really do. I got to write this note before I forget. If you Google, if you go to YouTube and search for nuclear weapon in space, somebody here in the comment section any second now will tell me what the name of that test was. I love the tests, these atomic tests in the 50s and 60s and 70s, Baker 1 and Able and all this other stuff. There is video footage of a nuclear weapon being detonated in outer space beyond the atmosphere, and it is the most beautiful thing I've ever seen in my life. It's like somebody cracked a crystal sphere. It just goes, and it's got all of this incredible detail. It's literally like somebody cracked a crystal ball. Nuclear detonation in space. And in my movie, there is going to be a nuclear detonation in space, and it looks just like that. So once again, the reality is actually cooler than what the lazy writers cook up. And if somebody can remember the name of that extra atmospheric test of a nuclear weapon, I want to say it was early 60s. Might have been later than that. But they detonated a bomb or two in outer space, and man, is it a beautiful thing to see. This is interesting. This is very interesting. Craig Schlevy says, what do you think about the difficulty that humans seem to have in thinking of war in 3 dimensions? We fought war in only 2 dimensions for thousands of years. And this is something that's actually kind of cool because it's another thing that you don't really expect. Because, there's a great scene in Wrath of Khan where, I've already talked about how ridiculous the Enterprise is. The movie Enterprise, it's just my favorite piece of hardware. It's the most beautiful thing ever made. But it looks like a ship, right? It goes forward and it's got it down and it banks into turns, and it's like it's afloat in the sea of space, and it's non-symmetrical. It would never look like that. The spaceship's going to look more like skyscrapers than like the Enterprise, I imagine. So there's that aspect of it and how it's kind of ridiculous. But you see them. This is the thing. When you see the combat in Wrath of Khan, what the Enterprise and the Defiant are, Starfish Prime, thank you, I think that's it, or Operation Dominique, anyway, one of those two, thank you, M2 Foster. A couple of people coming back with Operation Dominic, but you really need to see the video. It's on YouTube. You got to find it. It's fabulous. Anyway, when you're looking at the Enterprise duking it out with the Reliant in Wrath of Khan, what you're really seeing are 2 battleships afloat on a plane. Okay. As we said before, you'd never even see the enemy vessel. You wouldn't be anything. So somebody else brought up Starfish Prime. So it's not realistic in that sense. And then there's that scene at the end where it's Enterprise is in trouble and they've been badly damaged, and they're in the nebula, so they can't see anything. I said this before too. It's got to be said again. The Orion Nebula, you could fight a battle in the heart of the Orion Nebula. You've seen all those beautiful nebulae and all the dark dust clouds and all this other stuff. You could fight a battle in the middle of that, and you would not be able to detect that you're in the middle of a nebula. These things are light years deep. Light years deep. The densest part of the Orion Nebula is a superb vacuum. It's damn near perfect vacuum. Just another little fun fact to know and tell. Starfish Prime and Operation Dominique are coming back on that thing. So this idea of we're in a cloud and our sensors aren't working, no. But Spock says, Khan's thinking does reflect a certain two-dimensional thinking. So they start to go through the Z-axis, and the Enterprise rises up and comes from below. You got these two ships. If you watch the battle, it looks like the Reliant is moving through the nebula at about 30 miles an hour, and the Enterprise comes up at maybe 45 miles an hour, miles per hour. You're talking about, just to get into orbit, 17,500 miles an hour, 18,000 miles an hour. So this is one thing I'm glad I went through this question, because it's key to my combat sequence in the second movie, and it's just cool. What you've got is, if you're talking about realistic space combat, you don't just burn. It's not like Battlestar Galactica or Babylon 5, where you've just got endless supplies of thrust, right? A couple people said, the physics in Babylon 5 were great and helped by NASA. To the degree that they were vector physics, yes. That's why I didn't list Babylon 5 as a particularly favorite thing of mine, because the vector, in order to get you from point A to point B, is so long that you can't just suddenly turn around and stop and reverse that. It just doesn't happen that way. You've got a vector that is incredibly long vector, and you've got the ability to modify it by very, very small amounts at any given time. I told you guys about an app on my iPhone called New Orbit. Get that little app. It's awesome, because it will show you to get from point A to point B. You're thrusting at full force forever. You get faster and faster and faster and faster and faster and faster and faster. And then when you want to change course, if you direct the thrust at a 90-degree angle, it just slowly bends it. If you want to stop dead and you point your thrust in the opposite direction, you just keep moving backwards, and you move backwards ever so slowly, finally come to a complete stop. And then you sit there at a complete stop, and then you start to slowly come back this way, and you accelerate. There's a couple of challenges in that New Orbit app. It's just an iPhone app or an iPad app, where you have to land on an asteroid, or you have to land on... Going into orbit mechanically, just physically putting something in orbit, is really fun. And you have to rendezvous with the ship as you get better, and it's like, no, you got to match that thing's vector. You got to be going almost exactly parallel to it and catch up to it, and if it starts to turn, you got to start anticipating it. It takes forever. This back and forth stuff just doesn't happen. But in my movie, my point is this. You've got one ship in orbit around the sun, because you're outside of the Earth's orbit. So you're in solar orbits now. You got an orbit around the sun. And you got another ship in orbit around the sun. And you know that these ships both want to fight, because frankly, if one of them doesn't want to fight, you're probably not going to have a fight. The distances are so great that if one guy doesn't want to fight, you just don't have a fight. But they both want to fight, so they set up intersecting vectors. And there's an initial burn that they're on, and there's an initial burn that we're on, and we both know where each other is. So we talked about it at the very, very beginning. So I know where they are. They know where I am. The rockets aren't firing this whole time. The rockets fired for a few minutes at the top end, maybe a couple seconds, but several minutes. So we're heading out this way. They're heading up this way. There's a big crossing vector. I got to get the microphone down just so I can visualize this for you. So what that means is, if you got a Chinese ship here with an energy weapon, it's got a large sphere of the effective range of the weapon, and it's moving on a vector like this. And you got the American ship that's got a kinetic weapon, so it's got a smaller sphere of effective range, and these two things are intersecting each other, and the guy who can maneuver is the one who's going to determine what the engagement range is. But here's the thing that comes back to story. It's this. Once you've set that up, what the coolest part of my entire second movie, in my opinion, as a writer, as a storyteller, my favorite part about the reality of space combat is space combat becomes High Noon. It becomes the movie High Noon. You are headed to a rendezvous 7.5 days out, and they're headed to a rendezvous 7.5 days out. We're coasting towards each other. I can't shoot at the guy yet. He's way beyond my effective range. He can't shoot at me yet. He's way beyond my effective range. But we know that in 14 days, 17 hours, and 32 minutes, we will reach the closest point of approach, assuming neither of us modifies our course, but we can't modify it by much. So it becomes a countdown clock. And it's inevitable. It's inexorable is the term I'm looking for. This fight is going to happen, and we know to the second when it's going to happen, and there's not a damn thing we can do about it. Once you've set up that initial vector, you can't just stop and turn around. You got to go all the way around the block. So now you've got this tremendous, tremendous, dramatic tension of this clock counting down to this inevitable conflict, which will become fatal to at least one, if not both of the parties. That's a profoundly interesting thing dramatically. There's no parallel for it that I'm aware of in terrestrial fighting. There's no parallel where two navies are committed. It's not like you can change your mind. You're done. The fight is on, and it's going to take place at this intersection of this vector and that vector. And what is also cool about this is not only is that fight going to happen at a certain known point in the future, but we know how long the battle will take, because this business of stopping and turning around just doesn't happen. It just doesn't happen. So we know that as these two vectors start to converge, the ship with the larger effective range is going to be in effective range, and as it gets to closest point, that's where it's going to be at its most effective range, and then as it starts to move out, it will have a longer period of engagement on the tail end of the fight, and the ship with the smaller effective range coming in from the other direction is going to have a shorter period of time when it can use its weapons, but its weapons presumably are more deadly, and that's just cool. It's just cool. So, you know when the fight's going to happen, inevitably, and you know how long the fight is going to last, inevitably. You are going to be in battle for, 3 minutes? I don't know. I know this damn Ustream is running commercials, and I just wish I could find a better way to do this, and we probably can. Anyway, I'm just make sure I didn't have any other questions here, and then there's one more thing I'll do, and then we'll get on with it here. So anyway, the 3 dimensions question, which I thought was really, really cool, Craig. So I got off on the rails there again, but here's the thing that's actually kind of cool about this. You would think that space combat would be a 3-dimensional fight, right? Because we're not on a plane like we saw in Star Trek. We're not limited to ships on the ocean, which is what Star Trek and Babylon 5 and Battlestar Galactica are trying to simulate. 2 ships kind of on a plane. You say, you've got 3 dimensions. But what's fascinating about this, actually, Craig, is that you really don't. Believe it or not, you really do, in fact, only have 2 dimensions. You really only have a 2-dimensional deal. Now, my feedback on the monitor, there was like a 60-second commercial, and my video is locked up, so I'm going to reboot that. I don't see any indications that we don't have a signal here. So hopefully, if you're in the comment stream, just let me know, because I got to go watch some more commercials now. But hopefully, we're still getting what I get here. But here's the point I'm trying to make about it. No, it still takes place in a flat plane. Now, people are saying it's because 2 points make a line, but that's not my point. I'm not saying that it's a flat plane at whatever angle you'd want to make the plane determined to, although it is an interesting point. The point I'm trying to make is that everything in the solar system that's worth going to, all the planets and virtually all the asteroids, are in fact on a flat plane. And that plane's called the ecliptic. The ecliptic is the best way to think of the ecliptic is the sun's equator expended out into space. So everything in orbit around the sun orbits the equator of the sun. The Earth is tilted at a 23-degree angle, so if the Earth didn't tilt, if north was just straight up, then the Earth's equator would also match the sun's equator, and the ecliptic and the celestial equator would be the same thing, but they're not. The ecliptic is the plane of the solar system. So with slight, and when I say slight, I mean it is almost unnoticeable variations, Mercury and Venus and Earth, Mars, Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, Neptune, almost said Pluto, but I'm learning. Virtually all of the asteroids, the major asteroids, are in fact on a flat plane called the ecliptic, which is the plane of the solar system. So if you're going to go from Earth to Mars, it is in fact a 2-dimensional trip. You're not really getting into the 3rd dimension at all. It's kind of cool, isn't it? Nobody really thinks about that. So there you go. Not what you'd expect, but yeah, you pretty much are, in fact, operating on a flat plane. Although, needless to say, Star Trek Babylon 5 and Battlestar Galactica, they're not taking place in an orbital plane. They're taking place in deep space. So there you go. Robert Line asks, who controls space combat? Air Force, Navy, Army, or a new arm of the service? Do they divide responsibility? Army control of surface-based systems, Air Force, orbital, and Space Force outside L5, and so on. If I had to hand it over to one of the existing services, I'd hand it over to the Navy, because the operational problems seem to be more Navy-like. I think you've got ships instead of airplanes. I think you've got basically naval problems. I think the Navy would be the most, the best fit. But if I had a choice, I would start the United States Space Forces. I'd start a fifth branch of the service. And then you basically would have the Air Force would control the atmosphere of the planet Earth, the Navy, the wet Navy, as they often say in sci-fi adventures like Traveler. There was the Navy, which was the force between planets, and then there was the wet Navy, which was the surface Navy on an ocean. So Air Force would control the air, the Navy would control the oceans, the Marines would go ashore or do the ship-to-ship combat, boarding actions. Marines would be good. I don't know that you need Space Marines. Why would you need Space Marines? Marines are Marines. Put the whole point of a Marine is a soldier who can go from point A to point B on a ship quickly. Works for me. And I don't think you need Space Marines competing with the Marines. I think the Marines have earned the right to stay Marines. And I'm not taking anything away from the other branches either, Army, Navy, Air Force, or Coast Guard. They've all got their place. But I would start a new service. And the reason I'd start a new service is because if we start thinking of it as the Navy, we're not going to do it right. We'll just start making assumptions, and we shouldn't do that. Max Wild again. How effective would fusion bombs be in outer space? How close would the target have to be to the weapon to be affected? As I said, you don't have a blast. You have heat and radiation. Hopefully you can look up Operation Starfish, or I think it was Operation Dominique, and on YouTube. It's worth the look, really. It really is. It's just absolutely the most spectacular things, like blue, kind of blue-white cobalt, blue kind of fabulous. And finally, looks like a Robert Line question. Okay, Bill, if you had to fight a space battle against an alien race on equal terms, of course, which one would it be? Klingons, Kzinti, or the Kafirs from the old Traveler 2300 game? Well, first of all, those Klingon bastards, they killed my son. Klingon bastards, they killed my son. So there's a certain satisfaction about taking out the Klingons. But the Kafirs are terrific. The Kafirs. I'm going to give you 5 minutes on the Kafirs. I'm almost positive the Kafirs were the primary alien menace in Traveler 2300. The original Traveler role-playing game had pretty simple aliens. They had the aliens in the dog suit called the Vargur. They had the aliens in the lion suit called the Aslan. They had hivers, which were kind of a little more interesting. They had a really cool, what are the name of those herbivores? Kukri. I think the Kukri, they were descended from herbivores, and they were particularly lethal warriors because since they were technological herbivores, they didn't have the inhibitions on violence that predators have. You show a wolf shows another wolf its neck, and the wolf stops fighting. Herbivores were just killing machines. It's kind of interesting twist. But like I said, they were role-playing aliens, and they wanted them to be played easily by teenagers. So your Vargur, they're literally like they were German shepherds with ray guns, and the Aslan were lions with ray guns. But when they did Traveler 2300, they came up with a damn excellent, superb alien called the Kafir, and physically it wasn't spectacular, although it was pretty cool. They came from a much higher radiation planet, so they had a carapace. The Kafir is a slang term for a bug, for a cockroach. So the Kafirs have this giant kind of insensate carapace, and they're bigger than humans, and they're stronger than humans. They're from a higher gravity planet. So here's what's really horrifying about that. If you fight another alien race, for God's sakes, pray that they come from a lower gravity planet than you do, because if they come from a higher gravity planet, you're in real trouble. Not only are they stronger, they have to be stronger because the gravity's higher. They're quicker. They're quicker and stronger. They're faster. They have to be faster because things fall faster on their planet. Their reflexes have to be faster. We become the kind of tall, thin kind of, what? Oh, things fall so slowly here on Earth compared to these guys. So they were quick and they were strong. And they were terrifying. They were descended from scavengers, so they had these horrible bug-like mouth parts. Looked a lot like Predator. In fact, I'd be amazed if the Predator alien hadn't been taken virtually from the Caphers, unless that came first, in which case I apologize. But here's what's awesome about the Caphers, and this is where William H. Keith, I'm pretty sure, did the Capher supplement. Just deserves so much credit because he really hit on something profound. He said since they were descended from scavengers, that Caphers, as a race, had a bimodal intelligence. In other words, most of the time they were incredibly stupid. They were just IQ 60. They were simply stupid animals. And Capher soldiers were so dumb that all of their equipment had grates on them because the Caphers, when things wouldn't work, they just start smashing it with clubs. They were just dumb as a box of hammers because they were scavengers. Doesn't take a lot of skill to scavenge something. You don't have to sneak up on something. You don't have to stalk it. You just walk up to a dead body and start eating it. But this is the part that was just genius for reasons I will relate. William H. Keith decided that these Caphers had a bimodal kind of intelligence, and that whenever there was a threat, whenever there was a predator or a threat, the Capher physiology released a hormone exactly like adrenaline. But what this hormone did was it accelerated their intelligence for a while, half an hour, let's say. So what the humans fighting the Caphers would find would be that as long as they ambushed the Caphers would just be wandering along in a straight line, and they'd open fire on them and they'd just gun them down and so on. But 25 or 30 seconds later, these stupid, blundering, idiotic things became these killing machines because they'd gotten this adrenaline rush of intelligence. It actually accelerated their brains. It pumped psychochemicals into their brains and speeded up their minds. They became deadly warriors, but it took them a few minutes to get up to this point. And here's where it got really cool, because then you make a political point. This is the point to make. He went on to say that if you stimulated a Capher's intelligence like that, he would go up to the higher level, maybe 80, 90 IQ, 80s, 85s, so, smart as average Democrat, let's say, and then back down to this 50, 60 IQ kind of thing, smart as, average progressive. And then what would happen is every time that they underwent this little stimulation, they would get a net gain of permanent intelligence increase. Every time they went through it, they go up and down, but every time they came down not quite as far. So that the more experienced a Capher soldier was, the higher his base intelligence was. The more fights he'd survived, somebody smells arcade, but it's not arcade. The more fights he'd survived, the smarter he became over time, became more and more intelligent. The more intelligent he becomes, the more likely he is to survive the next battle. And so that's how these Capher soldiers and so on came about. And because these Caphers had this society like this, they took thousands of years to go from the first airplane to the first space flight. It was 700 years or something. We did it in 1903 to 63-ish, 60 years. So it took 700-800 years to do it because they didn't move very fast. Who cares? Now, here's the point. This is the part that's absolutely brilliant. Okay, so it's arcane. The Caphers had a cycle of civilization. The Caphers had a cycle that went back for hundreds of thousands, if not millions of years. And here's how the cycle worked. Capher bands, nomads out in the desert, facing hardships, constantly under threat, are constantly getting this threat stimulation, so they get smarter and smarter and smarter since they're constantly under attack. As they get smarter and smarter and smarter, they begin to form cooperative societies and they build cities. And once they build cities, they're able to start refining metals and so on, and they develop these superior weapons, which means that these Caphers now in cities, these civilized Caphers, are unbeatable. They're smarter, they've got much better technology, and they're no longer threatened by these other Caphers, so they build themselves these incredible cities and defensive cities, and everything's copacetic for about a generation. And what happens then is the Caphers in the city, since they're not threatened with this constant intelligence boost, become stupid. Stupider and stupider and stupider. And they begin to fear what they called the smart barbarians, the Caphers living out in the wild, who are constantly exposed to predators and threats. And so what the cycle would be the intelligent Kafirs would get together, they'd form a civilization, they'd develop weapons, they'd develop trade and culture, they'd make themselves into these safe little city fortresses, and the second they were safe, they became stupid. And outside the walls, the Kafirs are being challenged and their intelligence is going up, and those Kafirs would then come in and clean their clocks. And it went again and again and again. Human sociologists studying the Kafirs say we don't know how many cycles. Thousands of times. Rome falls and descends, Rome falls and descends. Same time, every time. Same pattern, every time. And then, just as a random deviation, as a freak of nature, comes a Kafir leader named Striker of Stars. Kafirs would name themselves. There'd be a violent ceremony, and it would be their first moment where they're really given, they're like 8 or 10 years old or something. They're pushed into combat in this ceremony. It's the first time they ever really completely wake up. It's like waking up for the first time. They mature at 12 years old or something. So they suddenly wake up, and it's the first time ever they've had this stimulation. The first time they're fully aware, and other Kafirs would say, "Name yourself," and most of the time they go, "La Blacha," or just some grunt or something. But they would say that every now and then a particularly bright Kafir would have that flash of that momentary flash, and he would come up with a name that meant something. And those were Kafirs to watch out for, because these guys had the goods. So there was this Kafir genius who was pretty bright all the time, and he's given this stimulation. He wakes up and says, "Name yourself." He says, "I name myself Striker of Stars." So Striker of Stars breaks the cycle of civilization for Kafirs. And what Striker of Stars does is Striker of Stars builds into the city life constant violence. He builds into the society of Kafirs constant violence, so that criminals are just sent into arena against other soldiers, and that if your superior is stupider than you are, you not only have the legal right, you have the obligation to assassinate him. So all these smart Kafirs coming up from the bottom are constantly trying to knock off the bosses, which means the bosses are constantly being threatened in the cities. And by instituting this violence is the lifeblood of the Kafir race. Striker of Stars breaks this rise and fall of civilizations, and finally Kafir society begins to develop technology. And then many centuries go by, and another Kafir named World Strider — how do I remember these things? I haven't played this game in 30 years. World Strider comes along, and he says, now that we have Starflight, the Kafir race has to make a decision. We either have to be expanding and fighting all the time, or we will fall down and fall to the smart barbarians. And so what you end up with is a race of creatures that doesn't just not fear violence or pain, they live for violence. Violence and warfare is their purpose. It's their entertainment. It's their philosophy. It's their drug. It's everything. Violence and warfare is everything, because it keeps them alive. It keeps them intelligent. And when humans are injured in battle, they experience pain. But again, William H. Keith, I'm almost positive it was him. He said when Kafirs got injured, it wasn't, they felt pain. It was pain, but the idea of dulling that is anathema to them, because that was the first time they're fully aware. They're in danger, or they're hurt, or they're under fire. It's like they've just woken up from a dream. So that's a pretty dangerous enemy, an enemy that the culture lives for violence, and that each individual soldier not only doesn't fear violence, but welcomes it, relishes it, can't wait for it. And you get cool little pieces of chrome. Chrome's those little things, those little bits of story that just don't really build any structure. They're just cool because they follow from the structure. And one of the pieces of the chrome that was so cool with the Kafirs was that Kafir officers had weapons. They had like truncheons, or they had like tasers or cattle prods, and they would hit the soldiers before they gave them the order. They didn't hit the soldier because he was so stupid he didn't follow the order. They had to hit the soldier, or shock the soldier, or hit the soldier, or bang him, in order to make him smart enough to understand the order in the first place. So they just go down the line and just start whacking these guys on the head. Or some of these things had like this magnetic ball that would shoot and knock them on the head, and basically went down the line and started administering this painful electrical shock to all of his soldiers before he gives them the order, because he's trying to make them smart enough to understand the order. That's really, really, really cool and really clever, because then the little spin-off on that is when the Kafirs capture human subjects, they beat them before they ask them the questions. not out of malice, not to punish them. They beat the human soldiers and human captives in order to make them smart enough to understand what they were going to ask. It's the best aliens. It's the best aliens I've ever seen. It was the best work of aliens that I've ever seen. Their tech level was well below ours, and they even had a pretty good work around that. Where, yes, it's true the Kafirs are not as smart as we are. The average Kafir IQ is 70 or 80. A Kafir genius. Oh, somebody, thanks. Cleaning guy, Kafir genius might be a guy with a 120 IQ. So we're much smarter than them, and that's a problem. And the way they solved the problem was they had the Kafirs conquer a race. Boy, if I can remember this one, I'll be really impressed. The little lemur kind of looking like things. They conquered a race that was technically very adept, but it was completely servile, and they turned them into their slaves, and they brought their new technology into the Kafirs, and the Kafirs upgraded their technology. And anyway, so that's that. So Winston Smith Room 101's having an attack of nostalgia, and so am I. The Kafirs were bloody marvelous, and the 2300 combat was terrific. And this is the power of throwing your life away doing silly things like playing role-playing games. They really open up your head. The book, The Yali. Thank you so much. Well, how many of you guys know this stuff? I thought I was like the only guy in the entire universe who ever played this game. I thought I'd talk about Traveler and people would just go, well, what now? Nah, the Yali, that was the name of their little fuzzy little aliens that they conquered, who were their technological slaves, and got them up to our tech levels. So they were a terrific alien. And the great thing about that was, we were talking about tech levels earlier, Cindy. Their tech level was lower than ours, but they had a realistic reach around for it. Not a reach around, oh my God. Workaround. Workaround. They had these highly advanced aliens, that would help them out. But that binary level of intelligence and that cycle of violence really does reproduce the RK switch, right? You're out in the wild, you're K, and you're tough, and you're facing other competitors, and you're wolves. And then you eliminate the threats, and you live in cities, and you turn into rabbits, and then the wolves that are outside take over the city, and then they turn into rabbits, and then the wolves that are outside come in and take over those rabbits, and they turn into rabbits, and it's a cycle of civilization. And that was 25, 30 years ago that I read that. And I don't think, Arcade Theory, I don't think he'd ever got a hold of it, but I'll tell you one thing, it was pretty cool. Pretty cool. So anyway, that's only 2 hours and 43 minutes and 51 seconds of space combat for us this evening. That was really fun. I just wrap up as I usually do with just kind of a quick status report. I realized when I was down at Comic-Con that I am now in the transition zone at the cusp. I'm in the rotor, dividing my short-term goals and my mid-term goals. This will just take a moment. Oh, and then I've got the trailer to show you. My short-term goals were to get BillWhittle.com up and start doing members-only content and drive up the membership so that I can have the resources to develop the movies. The Declaration Entertainment model didn't work. We don't have enough members, and we're not going to get enough members to do a feature film budget, which is $1 million, $1.5 million. But we can get enough members to develop the stuff to go out and get that private money. So with the office here, we've still got another 2 weeks of stuff to do. I thought I'd be done by now, but honestly, these firewalls are a lot of work. I'm shoveling a lot of coal, doing fireworks and trifectas and afterburners, so I have less free time than I thought. But once that members-only content is up, then I just keep those plates spinning, and that is the end of my short-term goals. I signed a 3-year lease on this building, and I mean to do a movie a year. I'm going to shoot Big Bat Problems, which is a sci-fi horror comedy, little movie, clever, funny, interesting action movie. I'm going to shoot this winter. I got the feeling I'm very confident I just go out and get the feature film budget $1 million or so and shoot the thing on this, relatively low budget. But if I can't, then I'll Kickstarter something and we'll go out and we'll shoot it for $200,000 or $300,000 or whatever. But I'm shooting something this winter. While that movie is in post-production next year, I'm going to be preparing for the movie I'm going to shoot the following winter. So we'll shoot Big Bet Problems the winter of 14. In the winter of 15, we're going to shoot the Common Sense Resistance movie. And in the winter of 16, we're going to shoot Aurora. Common Sense Resistance will have a Common Sense Resistance component in the real world. Aurora will have the Free Frontier. That'll be 2.5, 3 years from now, and one a year. That's the plan. And I realize now that I'm All these things used to be pulling me in different directions. I want to do movies. I need to do political work. I want to do this. No, it's all on a line now. Political work, maintain the level of output I'm doing now, which is hard, but doable. Firewall a week and afterburner every 2 weeks, all the trifectas. Add the daily content for members. Time over target is the 3-minute drill. It's literally 3 minutes. I read the question, a countdown clock starts, and you get it every day, 5 days a week. It's for members only. At the end of the week, we do best of time over target for the last week. If you'd like to join, great. We'll do 3 times a week, we'll do a Bill Me section where it's me and somebody doing a split screen on a webcam. You want to talk to me about Gator football? Not that I know much about that, other than Go Gators. You want to talk about anything? We'll talk members only, and we'll do a best of that on the weekend. And then once a month, we'll go out and shoot at a local theater for members first, but for everybody else, if the members don't fill it up, we'll get a 100-seat theater, and if we keep filling them up, we'll get a bigger theater. And once a month, we're going to go out and shoot a 2-hour show called Speakeasy, where it'll be me and Alfonso Rachel and, maybe Victor Davis Hansen is in town that week, and somebody else, and there are 4 or 5 of us sitting on a couch with a room full of our friends answering questions from the audience, and there'll be one of those for members every week and one of those for non-members every week. So 2 speakeasy segments a week if you're a member, 1 a week if you're not. It's the best I can do. Like I said, I've got a problem. I need to keep delivering stuff for people who aren't members, and I need to drive people to the membership, give them something worthwhile. But my point is, this stuff is just about here now. We're in the new building, and once I do that, I got to get the script written because we're going out to shoot this movie. And as the movies start to happen, we will start to shift a little bit from the content. It's going to be a nice, smooth dissolve. More and more movie content is going to go out to the members, and that means I can back off a little bit on the political content. I'm going to be doing political content forever. I realized on the trip down to Comic-Con, I was talking to my friend Fritz on the ride down, and I said, it's occurred to me I need to keep doing these forever because, number one, it's important. We got to keep handing out ammunition to the trench, to the soldiers in the trenches. Somebody has to hand out the ammunition. Preaching to the choir is important. The choir is the church, and you can't have a church without a choir, so you got to do that. And I remember I turned to my friend Fritz and I said, so I'm going to spread out in the movie business, but I'm going to keep doing this. And if Skippy Peanut Butter Company ever decides to get into Skippy Cinema or Skippy Entertainment, that's great. Good luck to you, Skippy. But if you do that, don't stop making the damn peanut butter, right? Skippy wants to get in the movie business. That's fantastic. But keep making the peanut butter because you never know. So right now we're right at the cusp of just getting out of the short-term plans, which is the political members-only content, and moving into the movie development budget. And as the movies start to come online, we're going to do what we were supposed to do with Declaration Entertainment. That wasn't my movie, so I had no power over it. I edited it, but I had no power over it. But when I shot the initial segment with the artist, which I haven't put together yet, but there's the initial consultation with me telling him what I want these creatures to look like, and then we have sets of renderings, and then we go back, and then we have script meetings. We'll show you the auditions, and we'll show you the be on the set, and members can come visit the set, and we'll show you the editing and the compositing, the special effects, all that stuff. And that will be some of the daily content because I don't think I can keep everything going at that level, but we want to move into the movie business, withdraw it back a little bit, and then just do nothing but firewall every week or every other week or something like that. So that's a general theory. But it occurred to me that I'm actually at peak stress and peak workload now because I got to keep loading stuff on to get from here to there. Once we get to the movie business, it's going to be a world changer. These videos, the views are way down, and it's not just for me. Claven's views are way down. Everybody's views are way down. I think people are just. I think they've had enough. I think people are just kind of in just get us through this next 2 years mode, because the views are way down. And across the board, it's time to move into the movie business. We'll reach people we never would have reached before. We're going to reach young people. I go to these Tea Party events, these Republican events, 7,000 people out there in a room, and the average age is deceased. We got to get out there and start getting kids, and it's not hard. They like action and guns and doing the right thing, and it's easy. It's easy, and we're going to do it. It's important. So, 2 hours and 50 minutes of the Stratosphere Lounge, episode 76, the Space Combat Edition, was an absolute blast. Absolute blast. I don't know what we'll do next time, probably just another grab bag, catch up on current events, but I love these theme shows. They're really fun. And And beyond that, as always, thanks for your support. If you're a member, thank you especially for your support, and especially thanks to the first-year members who really have honestly just put up the resources and gotten very little other than a mug and a bumper sticker in return, and for which I am enormously, enormously grateful. Enormously grateful. I'm going to start to make that up to you in the very near future, in the next week or two, I think. Anyway, here we are, new office. And I expect that, barring catastrophe, we'll see you next week on Wednesday for episode number 77 of the Stratosphere Lounge. Thanks again for joining us. Always a pleasure to see you. I will leave you with Astro Girl, because I just like the way she looks. She makes me happy. Take care, everybody. We'll see you soon. Bye-bye.